stop scrolling. What you're about to hear will change how you think about babysitters forever. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, Jessica received a phone call that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The voice on the other end whispered just 5 words. "Have you checked on the children?" The heavy breathing that followed was punctuated by a child's distant crying that abruptly cut off, leaving only the dial tone and Jessica's racing heartbeat. Tonight, I'm bringing you 11 real babysitter horror stories that parents tried to bury. But the truth always finds a way out. These aren't urban legends or creepypastas. These are documented incidents that happened to real families, real children, and real babysitters who trusted the wrong people. Before we dive into the darkness, if you're brave enough to face the truth about what happens when parents leave their children with strangers, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for Verified Fears. Because once you hear these stories, you'll understand why some secrets should never be kept. You've probably heard variations of these stories before, whispered in playgrounds or shared in parenting groups. But what I am about to reveal goes deeper than any urban legend. We're talking about force-feeding incidents that left children hospitalized, predators who used babysitting as hunting grounds, phone calls that came from inside the house while children slept upstairs, and horrors so twisted that 3 additional stories had to be added to this collection because the darkness runs deeper than anyone imagined. The FBI estimates that 1 in 4 babysitting incidents involve some form of negligence or abuse that goes unreported. Tonight, we're exposing the cases that made it to light, and the ones that almost didn't. If you're a parent watching this, subscribe to Verified Fears right now. Because knowledge is the only weapon we have against the monsters who hide behind innocent smiles and fake references. In the next 20 minutes, you'll hear about the babysitter who was caught on nanny cam doing something so disturbing that the parents couldn't speak for hours. You'll learn about the man in the bunny costume who stalked a house for 3 hours while a teenage babysitter fought for survival. You'll discover why one family's closet door was always locked until their babysitter made the mistake of opening it. And you'll uncover 3 additional nightmares so terrifying that they've never been shared publicly until tonight. Hit subscribe to Verified Fears if you want the truth, no matter how terrifying it gets. Because after tonight, you'll never look at babysitters the same way again. Fair warning, these 11 stories are based on real police reports, court documents, and first-hand testimonies. If you're easily disturbed, this is your last chance to click away. For everyone else, let's begin with story number 1. The overfeeding nightmare. Parents in suburban Ohio noticed something was wrong when their twin toddlers started gaining weight rapidly and losing their ability to walk. But what they discovered through hidden cameras would make them question everything they thought they knew about trust. Let's move to our first story. And I want you to brace yourself, because what happened to the Morrison family in suburban Columbus, Ohio, will shake you to your core. This isn't just about negligent babysitting. This is about systematic abuse that went undetected for months, hidden behind a smile so convincing that even experienced parents were fooled. Mark and Linda Morrison were the kind of parents every child deserves. Mark worked as an engineer at a local manufacturing plant, pulling long shifts to provide for his family, while Linda balanced her part-time nursing job with caring for their twin toddlers, Emma and Ethan, both just 18 months old. The twins were healthy, active children who had just started walking and were beginning to explore their world with a boundless curiosity that makes toddlerhood both magical and exhausting for parents. When Linda's hours at the hospital increased and Mark's overtime became mandatory, they knew they needed reliable childcare. That's when they met Margaret Chen through a local nanny service that came highly recommended by other families in their neighborhood. Margaret was a 34-year-old woman with impeccable references, a clean background check, and what seemed like genuine love for children. She had been babysitting and providing childcare for over a decade, with glowing testimonials from previous families who praised her reliability, her nurturing nature, and her ability to handle even the most challenging children. Margaret's interview went perfectly. She arrived punctually, dressed professionally, and immediately got down on the floor to interact with Emma and Ethan. She spoke to them in gentle tones, engaged them with simple games, and seemed to understand their individual personalities within minutes. She asked thoughtful questions about their routines, their favorite foods, their nap schedules, and any behavioral quirks the parents had noticed. She even brought a small bag of age-appropriate toys as gifts for the children, explaining that she believed in making every child feel special and cared for. The Morrisons were impressed by Margaret's credentials and her apparent expertise. She had completed courses in child development, infant CPR, and first aid. She provided references from 3 families who spoke glowingly of her work, describing her as trustworthy, loving, and incredibly reliable. One mother even mentioned that her previously fussy baby had become calmer and happier under Margaret's care. Everything about Margaret Chen seemed perfect, and the Morrisons felt they had found exactly what they were looking for. The arrangement began smoothly. Margaret would arrive at 7 a.m. sharp, just as Mark was leaving for work and Linda was preparing for her hospital shifts. She would care for the twins until 6 p.m., handling their meals, naps, playtime, and basic care with what appeared to be professional competence. The children seemed comfortable with her, and there were no obvious signs of distress or behavioral changes that might indicate problems. However, after about 6 weeks of this routine, Linda began to notice subtle changes in Emma and Ethan. At first, she attributed these changes to normal developmental variations, or perhaps minor growth spurts. The twins seemed to be eating more voraciously during evening meals and weekend family time, almost as if they were making up for missed nutrition during the day. They also seemed slightly more lethargic than usual, preferring to sit and play quietly rather than engaging in the active running and climbing that had characterized their behavior before Margaret's arrival. More concerning was the gradual but noticeable weight gain both children were experiencing. Emma, who had always been petite and active, began to develop a rounder face and softer belly. Ethan, previously lean and energetic, started to move more slowly and seemed to tire easily during play. Linda mentioned these observations to Mark, but they both rationalized the changes as normal variations in child development. After all, Margaret seemed so caring and professional, and the children never cried or showed obvious signs of distress when she arrived each morning. The weight gain continued over the following weeks, becoming more pronounced and harder to ignore. Both twins began to struggle with activities that had previously been easy for them. Climbing onto furniture became laborious, and their usual enthusiasm for active play diminished noticeably. They seemed to prefer sedentary activities and would often fall asleep during what should have been active play periods. Linda began to worry that something might be medically wrong with both children, as simultaneous weight gain and lethargy in twins seemed unusual. During a routine pediatric checkup, Dr. Sarah Williams, the twins' pediatrician, expressed concern about the significant weight gain both children had experienced in just 2 months. Emma had gained nearly 8 pounds, while Ethan had gained almost 10 pounds. Weight increases that were well outside normal parameters for their age group. Dr. Williams asked detailed questions about the children's diet, activity levels, and daily routines, trying to identify potential causes for the dramatic changes. Linda explained their childcare arrangement and described Margaret as professional and caring. She mentioned that Margaret prepared the children's meals during the day, according to the detailed instructions Linda had provided, which included appropriate portion sizes and nutritionally balanced options. Dr. Williams suggested keeping a detailed food diary and monitoring the children's eating patterns more closely. As the weight gain suggested, they might be consuming significantly more calories than appropriate for their age and activity level. That evening, Linda decided to have a serious conversation with Margaret about the children's diet and eating habits during the day. Margaret seemed surprised and concerned about the weight gain, explaining that she had been following Linda's instructions carefully and that the children always seemed hungry during meal times. She suggested that perhaps the children were going through a growth phase or that their metabolisms might be naturally slower than average. Margaret's response seemed reasonable and caring, and she volunteered to keep more detailed records of the children's daily food intake to help identify any potential issues. Despite Margaret's apparent cooperation and concern, the children's weight gain continued, and their energy levels remained lower than normal. Linda began to feel increasingly anxious about the situation, especially when other parents at the playground commented on how much the twins had grown and how different they seemed from their previously active selves. The children's clothing sizes had increased dramatically, and they were beginning to show signs of physical discomfort from carrying extra weight their small frames weren't designed to support. Mark suggested they might need to find a different child care arrangement if Margaret's feeding practices were somehow contributing to the problem. But Linda was reluctant to make such a drastic change without concrete evidence. Margaret had been reliable, professional, and seemingly caring, and finding quality childcare was extremely difficult in their area. They decided to give the situation a bit more time while monitoring it closely, hoping that whatever was causing the weight gain would resolve itself naturally. The breakthrough came when Linda's sister visited for a weekend and spent time observing the children's behavior and eating patterns. As a mother of 3 herself, Linda's sister immediately noticed that Emma and Ethan's eating behavior seemed unusual. They ate with an almost frantic urgency, as if they were afraid the food might be taken away. And they showed little ability to self-regulate their portions. They seemed to have lost their natural hunger and satiety cues, eating everything placed in front of them, regardless of whether they appeared to be genuinely hungry. Linda's sister suggested that something might be happening during the day that was affecting the children's relationship with food. She recommended that Linda consider installing a nanny camera system to monitor what was happening during Margaret's care periods. Initially, Linda felt uncomfortable with the idea of secretly recording their babysitter, as it seemed to violate the trust they had established. However, her concern for her children's health and well-being ultimately outweighed her discomfort with covert surveillance. Mark installed a discreet camera system over the weekend, placing small, hidden cameras in the kitchen, living room, and playroom areas where Margaret spent most of her time with the children. The cameras were motion-activated and would record continuously during Margaret's work hours, storing the footage on a secure digital system that the parents could review remotely or after work. The first few days of footage seemed to show normal childcare activities. Margaret fed the children at appropriate times, engaged them in play, and handled their basic needs competently. However, Linda noticed that Margaret seemed to be giving the children larger portions than the guidelines Linda had provided, and she appeared to be encouraging them to finish everything on their plates, even when they showed signs of being full. As Linda continued reviewing the footage over the following week, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Margaret was not just overfeeding the children, she was systematically forcing them to consume excessive amounts of food through a combination of psychological manipulation and physical coercion. The process was subtle and methodical, designed to avoid obvious signs of distress that might alert the parents to what was happening. Margaret's feeding routine began each morning with breakfast portions that were nearly double the size Linda had specified. When the children showed signs of being full or tried to stop eating, Margaret would employ various tactics to force them to continue. She would tell them stories about children who didn't eat their food becoming sick or weak, creating anxiety around not finishing meals. She would use games and distractions to keep spooning food into their mouths, even when they turned away or closed their lips. Most disturbingly, she would physically hold their hands to prevent them from pushing food away, and would gently but firmly hold their chins to keep their mouths open for additional spoonfuls. The lunch routine was even more systematic and disturbing. Margaret would prepare enormous portions of high-calorie foods, far exceeding what was appropriate for toddlers. She would then sit with each child individually, using a combination of cajoling, storytelling, and physical guidance to ensure they consumed everything she had prepared. When the children became full and tried to stop eating, Margaret would wait a few minutes and then resume feeding, explaining that their stomachs needed time to make room for more food. Perhaps most shocking was Margaret's afternoon snack routine, which involved multiple rounds of feeding that continued for hours. She would provide snacks, wait for the children to digest, and then provide more snacks, repeating this cycle throughout the afternoon. She seemed to view the children as projects to be fed, rather than individuals with natural hunger and satiety cues that should be respected. The psychological manipulation Margaret employed was sophisticated and deeply disturbing. She created elaborate stories about food being medicine that would make the children strong and healthy, convincing them that refusing to eat would make them sick. She told them that their parents would be disappointed if they didn't eat everything she prepared, creating anxiety around parental approval that compelled them to comply with her feeding demands. She also used positive reinforcement, praising them extensively when they finished large portions, expressing disappointment when they showed resistance to eating. Linda watched hours of this footage with growing horror and disbelief. The woman she had trusted to care for her children was systematically abusing them through forced overfeeding, creating unhealthy relationships with food that could have lifelong consequences. The children's weight gain, lethargy, and changed eating behaviors suddenly made perfect sense, and Linda realized that Margaret's actions constituted a form of child abuse that was both subtle and devastating. The most disturbing aspect of Margaret's behavior was how calculated and intentional it appeared to be. This wasn't negligent overfeeding or misunderstanding about appropriate portions. This was deliberate, systematic abuse designed to alter the children's physical appearance and relationship with food. Margaret seemed to take satisfaction in the children's compliance and appeared to view their weight gain as evidence of her success in caring for them. Linda immediately called Mark at work and asked him to come home to review the footage. Together, they watched hours of recordings that documented the systematic abuse their children had been experiencing for months. They were horrified by Margaret's behavior and devastated by the realization that their children had been suffering while they believed they were receiving excellent care. The couple immediately contacted their pediatrician, who recommended they document the evidence and report the abuse to local child protective services and law enforcement. Dr. Williams explained that forced overfeeding could cause serious health problems for young children, including metabolic disorders, digestive issues, and psychological trauma around food that might persist for years. Mark and Linda also contacted an attorney who specialized in child care abuse cases. The attorney reviewed the video evidence and confirmed that Margaret's actions constituted child abuse and potentially criminal behavior. The systematic nature of the overfeeding, combined with the psychological manipulation and physical coercion involved, created a strong case for prosecution. When confronted with the video evidence, Margaret initially denied any wrongdoing, claiming she was simply ensuring the children received adequate nutrition. However, when presented with specific footage showing her forcing food into the children's mouths despite their obvious distress and resistance, she eventually admitted to the overfeeding but claimed she believed she was helping the children by ensuring they were well nourished. The investigation revealed that Margaret had engaged in similar behavior with children from previous families, though none of the other parents had discovered the abuse or reported it to authorities. Several families were contacted during the investigation, and some reported that their children had experienced unexplained weight gain and behavioral changes while under Margaret's care, though they had not connected these changes to abuse. The legal proceedings were lengthy and emotionally draining for the Morrison family. Margaret was ultimately charged with multiple counts of child abuse and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by probation and mandatory counseling. She was also required to register as a child abuser and was permanently banned from working in any capacity involving childcare. The recovery process for Emma and Ethan was gradual and required ongoing medical and psychological support. With proper nutrition and the elimination of forced feeding, both children gradually returned to healthy weights over the course of several months. However, they required extensive therapy to address the psychological trauma and to rebuild healthy relationships with food and eating. Dr. Williams worked closely with the family to develop appropriate nutrition plans and to monitor the children's physical recovery. She also referred them to a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, as both children showed signs of anxiety around mealtimes and had developed unhealthy eating behaviors as a result of their abuse. The psychological impact of the abuse extended beyond the children to affect the entire family. Linda struggled with guilt and self-blame, questioning how she had failed to recognize the signs of abuse sooner. Mark dealt with anger and feelings of helplessness, struggling to understand how someone could deliberately harm innocent children. Both parents required counseling to process their emotions and to learn how to support their children's recovery effectively. The case also had broader implications for childcare practices and oversight in their community. The nanny service that had recommended Margaret implemented more stringent screening procedures and began requiring periodic check-ins with families to monitor childcare arrangements. Local pediatricians became more aware of the signs of feeding-related abuse and began educating parents about the importance of monitoring their children's eating behaviors and physical changes. The Morrison family's experience highlighted the vulnerability of young children in child care situations and the importance of trusting parental instincts when something seems wrong. Linda's initial concerns about the children's weight gain and behavioral changes were valid indicators of abuse, even though the signs were subtle and could have been attributed to normal developmental variations. The case also demonstrated the value of modern surveillance technology in protecting children from abuse. Without the nanny camera footage, Margaret's systematic overfeeding might have continued indefinitely, causing even more severe physical and psychological damage to Emma and Ethan. The video evidence was crucial not only for stopping the abuse, but also for ensuring that Margaret faced appropriate legal consequences for her actions. Years later, Emma and Ethan have recovered from their traumatic experience and have developed healthy relationships with food and eating. However, the Morrison family remains vigilant about child care arrangements and continues to advocate for better protection of children in care situations. Their story serves as a powerful reminder that child abuse can take many forms and that even seemingly caring and professional caregivers can pose serious threats to children's safety and well-being. The overfeeding nightmare experienced by the Morrison family represents one of the most disturbing forms of childcare abuse. Systematic harm disguised as care and nurturing. Margaret Chen's actions were not the result of ignorance or negligence, but were deliberate, calculated abuse designed to alter the children's physical appearance and psychological relationship with food. The case serves as a stark reminder that parents must remain vigilant and trust their instincts when something seems wrong with their children's care, no matter how professional or caring their child care provider appears to be. Let's move to our second story. And I need to warn you that what happened to the Henderson family will make you question everything you think you know about the people you invite into your home. This isn't just about theft. This is about a violation so personal and disturbing that it challenges our basic understanding of human decency and the sacred bond between mother and child. Rachel Henderson was a dedicated new mother living in Portland, Oregon, trying to balance her career as a marketing coordinator with the demands of caring for her 6-month-old daughter, Lily. Like many working mothers, Rachel had made the difficult decision to return to work after her maternity leave ended. But she was determined to continue breastfeeding her daughter. This meant maintaining a rigorous pumping schedule at work and carefully storing precious breast milk to ensure Lily received the nutrition Rachel believed was best for her development. For Rachel, breastfeeding represented more than just nutrition. It was an emotional connection to her daughter, a way to provide the best possible start in life despite the challenges of returning to work. She had invested in a high-quality breast pump, specialized storage containers, and a dedicated freezer space to maintain her milk supply. Every ounce was precious, representing hours of her time and effort, and she meticulously labeled and dated each container to ensure freshness and proper rotation. The Henderson family's search for reliable child care had been extensive and careful. Rachel's husband, David, worked long hours as a software engineer, and they needed someone who could provide consistent, nurturing care for Lily during Rachel's work hours. After interviewing several candidates and checking references thoroughly, they hired Marcus Thompson, a 28-year-old male nanny who came with excellent recommendations and seemed genuinely passionate about child care. Marcus had been working in child care for over 5 years, with experience caring for infants and toddlers in various family settings. His references spoke highly of his reliability, his gentle manner with children, and his professional approach to child care responsibilities. He had completed courses in infant care, CPR certification, and early childhood development, and he presented himself as someone who understood the unique needs of working families. During his interview, Marcus demonstrated knowledge about infant feeding schedules, developmental milestones, and the importance of maintaining routines that would support both the baby's needs and the parents' work requirements. What particularly impressed Rachel and David was Marcus's understanding of breastfeeding support for working mothers. He spoke knowledgeably about the challenges of maintaining milk supply while working, the importance of proper milk storage and handling, and his willingness to support Rachel's breastfeeding goals. He assured them that he understood the value of breast milk and would handle it with the same care and attention that Rachel herself provided. The arrangement began smoothly, with Marcus arriving each morning at 7:30 a.m. to care for Lily while Rachel and David went to work. Marcus seemed to adapt quickly to Lily's routine, handling her feedings, naps, and playtime with apparent competence and genuine affection. Lily seemed comfortable with him, and there were no obvious signs of distress or behavioral changes that might indicate problems with the care arrangement. Rachel had established a careful system for managing her breast milk supply. Each evening, she would pump additional milk to supplement what she produced during work hours, storing it in clearly labeled containers in a dedicated section of their refrigerator. She maintained detailed records of how much milk she pumped, how much Lily consumed each day, and how much remained in storage. This system allowed her to monitor her supply and ensure that Lily always had adequate nutrition available. After about 3 weeks of Marcus's care, Rachel began to notice discrepancies in her milk inventory that she couldn't easily explain. Initially, the differences were small, perhaps an ounce or two less than she expected based on her records and Lily's typical consumption patterns. Rachel attributed these discrepancies to normal variations in Lily's appetite or possible measurement errors in her tracking system. However, as the weeks continued, the discrepancies became more pronounced and harder to rationalize. Rachel was meticulous about her record keeping, partly because maintaining her milk supply required careful monitoring, and partly because she wanted to ensure Lily was receiving adequate nutrition. When she began consistently finding that more milk was missing than Lily could reasonably have consumed, she started to worry that something might be wrong with her storage system or that milk was spoiling faster than expected. The missing milk became a source of increasing anxiety for Rachel. Each ounce represented significant time and effort on her part, and the thought that her hard work might be going to waste was deeply frustrating. She began double-checking her storage containers, examining them for leaks or other problems that might explain the disappearing milk. She also started asking Marcus more detailed questions about Lily's feeding patterns, wondering if perhaps the baby was going through a growth spurt that required more nutrition than usual. Marcus's responses to Rachel's questions were always reasonable and professional. He maintained detailed feeding logs that showed appropriate amounts of milk consumption for Lily's age and size, and he expressed concern about Rachel's worries regarding the milk supply. He suggested that perhaps Rachel was being too precise in her measurements, or that normal variations in pumping output might explain the discrepancies she was noticing. The situation escalated when Rachel realized that entire containers of milk were disappearing, not just small amounts that might be attributed to measurement errors or increased consumption. She discovered that containers she had specifically set aside for future use were missing entirely, while Marcus's feeding logs showed no corresponding increase in Lily's consumption. This realization forced Rachel to confront the possibility that someone was deliberately taking her breast milk. The thought that someone might be stealing her breast milk was so bizarre and disturbing that Rachel initially dismissed it as impossible. Who would want to steal breast milk, and what could they possibly do with it? The idea seemed so outlandish that she continued looking for alternative explanations, wondering if perhaps she was making errors in her record-keeping or if there were storage problems she hadn't identified. However, as the pattern continued and became more obvious, Rachel could no longer ignore the evidence. Significant amounts of her carefully stored breast milk were disappearing on days when Marcus cared for Lily, and there was no reasonable explanation for where it was going. The realization that someone was stealing something so personal and precious filled Rachel with a combination of anger, violation, and disbelief. Rachel decided to discuss the situation with her sister Jennifer, who had also breastfed her children and understood the emotional and practical significance of breast milk for working mothers. Jennifer was immediately suspicious of Marcus and suggested that Rachel needed to investigate the situation more thoroughly. She recommended that Rachel consider installing a hidden camera system to monitor what was happening in her home during Marcus's care periods. Initially, Rachel was reluctant to engage in covert surveillance of their childcare provider. The idea of secretly recording Marcus felt like a violation of the trust they had established, and she worried about the legal and ethical implications of hidden cameras in their home. However, her concern about the missing milk and the need to protect her family ultimately outweighed her discomfort with surveillance. David installed a discreet camera system over a weekend, placing small, hidden cameras in the kitchen and living areas where Marcus spent most of his time with Lily. The cameras were motion-activated and would record continuously during Marcus's work hours, storing the footage on a secure digital system that Rachel and David could review after work. The first few days of footage showed normal childcare activities, with Marcus feeding Lily, engaging her in play, and handling her basic needs competently. However, Rachel noticed that Marcus spent considerable time in the kitchen during periods when Lily was napping, and his behavior in that space seemed somewhat unusual. He appeared to be examining the contents of their refrigerator more thoroughly than necessary for his childcare duties. As Rachel continued reviewing the footage over the following week, she discovered behavior that was both shocking and deeply disturbing. Marcus was indeed stealing her breast milk, but what he was doing with it was far more bizarre and violating than she could have imagined. The footage revealed that Marcus was not just taking small amounts for some unknown purpose. He was consuming her breast milk directly, drinking it as if it were a regular beverage. The recordings showed Marcus systematically going through Rachel's stored breast milk, selecting containers, and drinking the contents while Lily slept. He would carefully choose containers from the back of the storage area, apparently trying to select milk that Rachel might not immediately notice was missing. He would drink the milk slowly and deliberately, seeming to savor it as if it were a special treat or delicacy. What made the situation even more disturbing was Marcus's apparent ritual around consuming the breast milk. He would warm it slightly, pour it into a regular glass, and drink it while sitting at the kitchen table, sometimes checking his phone or reading while he consumed Rachel's milk. The casual, routine nature of his behavior suggested that this was not an impulsive act, but a deliberate, ongoing practice that he had been engaging in for weeks. Rachel watched the footage with a mix of shock, discomfort, and disbelief, realizing that someone had intruded on such a personal and meaningful part of her life. Something tied to her care for her daughter left her shaken. What she saw felt like a deep breach of privacy, challenging her sense of safety and trust in a way she had never imagined. The footage also revealed that Marcus had been taking photos of himself drinking the breast milk, apparently documenting his consumption for some unknown purpose. This discovery added another layer of disturbing behavior to an already shocking situation, suggesting that Marcus's actions might be part of some larger pattern or fetish that extended beyond simple theft. David's reaction to the footage was immediate anger and disbelief. The violation of their home, their trust, and something so personal to his wife filled him with rage and a desire for immediate confrontation. However, Rachel convinced him that they needed to document the evidence thoroughly and seek legal advice before taking any action that might compromise their ability to pursue legal remedies. The couple immediately contacted their pediatrician to discuss any potential health risks to Lily from Marcus's behavior. Dr. Patricia Moore assured them that Lily had not been harmed, as Marcus had been stealing milk that was intended for future use, rather than contaminating milk that was actually fed to the baby. However, she recommended that they have Lily examined to ensure there were no signs of neglect or other problems related to Marcus's care. Rachel and David also contacted an attorney who specialized in employment law and personal violations. The attorney reviewed the video evidence and confirmed that Marcus's actions constituted theft and potentially other criminal violations. The systematic nature of the theft, combined with the intimate nature of what was stolen, created grounds for both criminal prosecution and civil litigation. When confronted with the video evidence, Marcus initially denied the allegations, claiming that the footage must have been manipulated or that there was some misunderstanding about what was shown. However, when presented with clear recordings of him drinking the breast milk and taking photos of himself, He eventually admitted to the behavior, but offered explanations that were both bizarre and disturbing. Marcus claimed that he had been consuming the breast milk for health and fitness purposes, having read online that breast milk contained nutrients and antibodies that could benefit adult health and athletic performance. He insisted that he had not intended to harm anyone, and that he believed the small amounts he was taking would not be missed. He seemed genuinely surprised that Rachel and David were upset about his behavior, suggesting a fundamental disconnect from normal social boundaries and understanding of personal violation. The investigation revealed that Marcus had engaged in similar behavior with previous families, though none of the other employers had discovered the theft or reported it to authorities. When contacted during the investigation, several families reported that they had noticed discrepancies in their breast milk supplies while Marcus was employed with them, though they had attributed these discrepancies to other causes and had not investigated further. The legal proceedings were complicated by the unusual nature of the crime and the challenge of determining appropriate charges and penalties for such behavior. Marcus was ultimately charged with theft and violation of privacy, and he was required to pay restitution to the Henderson family for the value of the stolen breast milk and the emotional distress caused by his actions. He was also required to undergo psychological evaluation and counseling to address the underlying issues that had led to his behavior. The recovery process for Rachel was emotionally challenging and required ongoing support from both her family and professional counselors. The violation of something so personal and intimate had created trust issues that extended beyond childcare to affect her general sense of safety and security. She struggled with feelings of disgust and violation that persisted long after Marcus was no longer part of their lives. Rachel also had to rebuild her breast milk supply, as the stress and emotional trauma of the situation had affected her ability to produce milk effectively. This required working with lactation consultants and making adjustments to her pumping schedule and nutrition to restore her supply to levels that would meet Lily's needs. The case had broader implications for the child care industry and highlighted the vulnerability of families to violations by trusted caregivers. The intimate nature of Marcus's theft represented a type of violation that most families would never consider when screening child care providers, and it demonstrated the need for more comprehensive background checks and ongoing monitoring of child care arrangements. The Henderson family's experience also highlighted the importance of trusting parental instincts when something seems wrong, even when the signs are subtle or seem insignificant. Rachel's careful tracking of her milk supply and her attention to discrepancies ultimately led to the discovery of Marcus's behavior, preventing further violation and protecting other families from similar experiences. The case received significant media attention due to the unusual nature of the crime and the intimate violation it represented. The coverage sparked discussions about the screening and monitoring of child care providers, particularly male nannies working in homes with nursing mothers. Some families began installing permanent surveillance systems in their homes, while others implemented more rigorous monitoring procedures for their child care arrangements. Years later, Rachel continues to advocate for better protection of families from child care-related violations and has become involved in organizations that support parents who have experienced similar violations. Her experience serves as a powerful reminder that trust must be balanced with appropriate safeguards, and that even seemingly minor discrepancies or concerns should be taken seriously when children's safety and family security are at stake. The breast milk theft experienced by the Henderson family represents one of the most intimate and disturbing violations possible in a child care relationship. Marcus Thompson's actions went beyond simple theft to constitute a profound violation of personal boundaries and family trust that had lasting emotional and psychological impacts on the entire family. The case serves as a stark reminder that families must remain vigilant about protecting themselves from violations that they might never imagine possible, and that appropriate safeguards and monitoring are essential components of any child care arrangement. Let's move to our third story. And what you're about to hear will make you understand why some parents never sleep peacefully again. This isn't about malicious intent or calculated cruelty. This is about something equally terrifying: complete and utter indifference to a child suffering. Sometimes the most horrifying monsters are those who simply don't care. Amanda and Robert Chen were successful professionals living in a beautiful suburban home in Naperville, Illinois. Amanda worked as a financial analyst for a major consulting firm, while Robert managed IT operations for a healthcare company. Both had demanding careers that required long hours and occasional travel, but they had always prioritized their family life and the well-being of their two young children, 3-year-old Sophie and 18-month-old Michael. The Chen family had always been fortunate with childcare arrangements. For the first few years, Amanda's mother had helped with the children, providing loving, reliable care that gave the parents peace of mind while they worked. However, when Amanda's mother moved to Florida to care for her own aging parents, the Chens found themselves needing to find professional childcare for the first time. After an extensive search and interview process, they hired Brenda Walsh, a 45-year-old woman who had been working as a nanny and babysitter for over 15 years. Brenda came with solid references from previous families, a clean background check, and what appeared to be extensive experience caring for children of various ages. During her interview, she demonstrated knowledge about child development, safety protocols, and age-appropriate activities. She seemed professional, reliable, and genuinely interested in providing quality care for Sophie and Michael. Brenda's daily responsibilities included arriving at the Chen home at 7:30 a.m., preparing breakfast for the children, engaging them in educational and recreational activities, managing their nap schedules, preparing lunch and snacks, and maintaining their safety and well-being, until Amanda or Robert returned from work around 6 p.m. The arrangement seemed straightforward, and Brenda appeared to understand and accept all aspects of her responsibilities. Initially, everything seemed to be going well with the new childcare arrangement. Brenda arrived punctually each morning, and the children appeared comfortable with her presence. Sophie, who was naturally outgoing and talkative, seemed to adapt quickly to having Brenda care for her during the day. Michael, still very young and dependent on routine, continued his normal eating and sleeping patterns without obvious disruption. However, after several weeks, Amanda began to notice subtle changes in both children's behavior and demeanor. Sophie, who had always been energetic and enthusiastic about sharing details of her day, became more subdued and less communicative about her experiences with Brenda. When asked about her activities or what she had done during the day, Sophie would give vague, minimal responses or simply say that she had played, without providing the detailed, excited descriptions that had been typical of her personality. Michael's changes were more physical and concerning. Amanda noticed that he seemed to have more bruises and minor injuries than usual, particularly on his arms, legs, and forehead. When she asked Brenda about these injuries, Brenda would explain them as normal childhood accidents: falling while learning to walk, bumping into furniture, or tumbling during play. Her explanations seemed reasonable, as toddlers are naturally prone to minor injuries as they develop coordination and explore their environment. More troubling was Michael's apparent regression in some developmental areas. He had been making good progress with walking, and was beginning to climb onto furniture and navigate stairs with assistance. However, Amanda noticed that he seemed more hesitant and fearful about physical activities, often crying when encouraged to try new movements or explore new areas of their home. His sleep patterns also became more disrupted, with frequent nighttime waking and difficulty settling down for naps during weekends when Brenda wasn't present. Amanda discussed these observations with Robert, and they both agreed that the changes might be normal adjustments to having a new caregiver or natural variations in the children's development. Brenda continued to seem professional and competent, and there were no obvious red flags that would suggest serious problems with her care. They decided to monitor the situation closely while giving the arrangement more time to stabilize. The situation escalated when Amanda decided to come home early from work one afternoon due to a canceled meeting. She had not informed Brenda of her early return, thinking she would surprise the children and perhaps observe their normal routine with their caregiver. What she discovered when she quietly entered her home through the back door was a scene that would haunt her for years to come. Amanda found Michael, barely 18 months old, crying hysterically in his crib while Brenda sat in the living room, completely absorbed in her smartphone and apparently oblivious to the child's distress. Michael's crying was not the normal fussing of a tired or hungry toddler. It was the desperate, panicked crying of a child in genuine distress. His face was red and tear-streaked, and he appeared to have been crying for an extended period based on his exhausted, hoarse voice. Even more shocking was the discovery that Michael had somehow fallen or been injured, as there was a visible bump on his forehead and what appeared to be dried blood on his lip. Despite these obvious signs of injury and his continued crying, Brenda remained in the living room, scrolling through her phone and showing no concern or awareness of the child's condition. Sophie was found sitting quietly in her bedroom, also appearing distressed, but trying to comfort herself with a stuffed animal. When Amanda asked Sophie what had happened, the 3-year-old explained in her limited vocabulary that Michael had fallen down and had been crying lots, but that Brenda had told her to be quiet and stay in her room. Sophie's description suggested that Michael's injury and subsequent distress had been ongoing for some time without any intervention or comfort from their caregiver. Amanda immediately tended to Michael, checking his injuries and trying to comfort him while simultaneously confronting Brenda about the situation. Brenda's response was casual and dismissive, explaining that Michael had fallen while playing and that she had checked on him and determined he was fine. She seemed annoyed that Amanda was making such a big deal about what she characterized as a normal childhood accident. When Amanda pointed out that Michael was clearly injured and had been crying for an extended period, Brenda shrugged and said that children cry all the time, and that she couldn't be expected to coddle them every time they had minor bumps or bruises. Her attitude was shockingly indifferent, showing no empathy for Michael's distress or understanding of her responsibility to provide comfort and appropriate care when children were hurt or upset. Amanda immediately called Robert at work and asked him to come home, explaining that there had been an incident with Brenda and that they needed to address the child care situation immediately. She also called their pediatrician to schedule an urgent appointment to have Michael's injuries evaluated and to ensure he had not sustained any serious harm. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the children's pediatrician, examined Michael and determined that while his injuries were not life-threatening, they were consistent with a significant fall that should have prompted immediate medical evaluation and appropriate first aid. The bump on his forehead suggested possible head trauma that required monitoring, and the injury to his lip needed proper cleaning and care to prevent infection. Dr. Martinez was concerned that these injuries had not been properly addressed when they occurred, and that the child had been left to suffer without appropriate comfort or medical attention. More troubling was Dr. Martinez's observation that Michael showed signs of ongoing stress and anxiety that seemed disproportionate to his recent injury. His behavior during the examination suggested that he might have experienced previous incidents of neglect or inadequate care that had created a pattern of distress and insecurity. The doctor recommended that both children be monitored closely for signs of trauma or behavioral changes that might indicate ongoing problems with their care. Amanda and Robert decided to terminate Brenda's employment immediately, but they also realized they needed to understand the full extent of what had been happening in their home during Brenda's care periods. They decided to install a comprehensive nanny camera system to document any remaining interactions with Brenda and to protect themselves legally if further action became necessary. The decision to review what had been happening in their home led Amanda and Robert to install temporary cameras before Brenda's final day of work, ostensibly to document the transition to new childcare arrangements. What they captured during Brenda's last few hours of employment was even more disturbing than what Amanda had witnessed during her unexpected early return. The footage revealed a pattern of neglect and indifference that was systematic and ongoing. Brenda would arrive each morning and immediately settle into the living room with her phone, paying minimal attention to the children's needs or activities. She would provide basic meals, but showed no interest in engaging the children in educational activities, reading to them, or providing the nurturing interaction that young children require for healthy development. Most disturbing was Brenda's response to the children's needs for comfort, attention, or assistance. When Sophie would approach her with questions, requests for help, or simply seeking interaction, Brenda would dismiss her with minimal responses or tell her to go play without providing any guidance or engagement. When Michael cried or showed signs of distress, Brenda would either ignore him completely or respond with irritation, sometimes telling him to stop crying without addressing whatever was causing his upset. The footage also revealed multiple incidents where the children had minor accidents or injuries that Brenda either ignored completely or addressed with minimal, inadequate care. In one particularly disturbing sequence, Michael fell while trying to climb onto a chair and began crying while holding his arm. Instead of immediately checking on him and providing comfort, Brenda continued looking at her phone for several minutes before finally acknowledging his distress with an annoyed sigh and a cursory, "You're fine," without even examining his injury. Perhaps most shocking was footage showing Brenda actively discouraging the children from approaching her when they needed help or comfort. She would tell them to leave her alone when they sought attention and would sometimes physically turn away from them when they tried to show her things or engage her in conversation. Her behavior suggested that she viewed the children as inconveniences to be tolerated, rather than individuals deserving of care, attention, and nurturing. The systematic nature of Brenda's neglect became clear as Amanda and Robert reviewed hours of footage from the temporary cameras. This was not occasional inattention or momentary lapses in care. This was deliberate, ongoing indifference to the children's physical and emotional needs. Brenda seemed to view her job as simply being present in the house, while the children entertained themselves, with no understanding or acceptance of her responsibility to provide active, nurturing care. The legal implications of Brenda's behavior were significant, as her neglect constituted child endangerment and violation of her employment responsibilities. Amanda and Robert consulted with an attorney who specialized in child care negligence cases, and they were advised to document all evidence of Brenda's behavior and to report the situation to local child protective services to ensure that other families would be protected from similar neglect. The investigation revealed that Brenda had a history of similar complaints from previous employers, though none had been severe enough to result in formal charges or prevent her from finding new employment. Several families reported that their children had experienced unexplained injuries, behavioral changes, or developmental regression while under Brenda's care. But they had attributed these issues to normal childhood variations rather than recognizing them as signs of neglect. The emotional impact on Sophie and Michael was significant and required ongoing therapeutic intervention to address. Sophie, despite her young age, had internalized the message that her needs and feelings were not important, leading to increased anxiety and difficulty expressing her emotions. Michael's development had been affected by the lack of nurturing interaction and the trauma of being ignored when he was hurt or distressed. Child psychologist Dr. Sarah Thompson worked with both children to address the trauma they had experienced and to help them rebuild their sense of security and trust. She explained to Amanda and Robert that very young children are particularly vulnerable to neglect because they depend entirely on caregivers for both physical safety and emotional regulation. When caregivers are consistently unresponsive or dismissive, children can develop lasting insecurities and difficulties with emotional development. The recovery process for the entire family was lengthy and challenging. Amanda struggled with guilt about not recognizing the signs of neglect sooner and questioned her ability to make good decisions about her children's care. Robert dealt with anger about the violation of their trust and the harm that had been done to their children by someone they had paid to protect and nurture them. The case highlighted the importance of comprehensive background checks that go beyond criminal history to include detailed references from previous employers and ongoing monitoring of child care arrangements. Many families assume that the absence of obvious abuse means that adequate care is being provided. But Brenda's case demonstrated that neglect can be equally harmful to children's development and well-being. Amanda and Robert also learned about the importance of creating environments where children feel safe reporting problems or concerns about their caregivers. Sophie's reluctance to discuss her experiences with Brenda had been an early warning sign that something was wrong. But the parents had not recognized it as such or known how to encourage more detailed communication from their young daughter. The legal proceedings against Brenda were complicated by the challenge of proving neglect in cases where there was no physical abuse or obvious criminal behavior. However, the video evidence of her systematic indifference to the children's needs provided clear documentation of her failure to meet basic standards of child care. Brenda was ultimately charged with child endangerment and was required to pay restitution to the Chen family for the costs of therapy and medical care related to her neglect. The case also resulted in changes to local child care licensing and oversight procedures, with increased emphasis on ongoing monitoring of child care providers and better training for parents about recognizing signs of neglect. The Chen family became advocates for improved child care standards and worked with local organizations to educate other parents about the warning signs of inadequate care. Years later, Sophie and Michael have recovered from their traumatic experience with Brenda. Though both parents remain more vigilant about child care arrangements and have implemented permanent monitoring systems in their home, the family's experience serves as a powerful reminder that adequate child care requires more than simply ensuring children's physical safety. It requires active engagement, nurturing interaction, and genuine care for children's emotional and developmental needs. The negligent watcher case experienced by the Chen family represents one of the most insidious forms of child care abuse. Systematic indifference disguised as adequate supervision. Brenda Walsh's behavior demonstrated that sometimes the greatest threat to children comes not from active malice, but from complete lack of empathy and understanding of children's needs. The case serves as a stark reminder that families must look beyond surface-level competence to ensure that their child care providers possess the emotional intelligence and genuine caring necessary to support children's healthy development and well-being. Let's move to our fourth story. And I need to prepare you for what might be the most terrifying babysitting experience ever documented. This isn't just about a strange intruder or a prank gone wrong. This is about 3 hours of pure psychological terror that transformed a routine babysitting job into a fight for survival that still haunts everyone involved. 17-year-old Jessica Martinez was an experienced babysitter living in the small town of Fairfax, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. She had been babysitting for local families since she was 14, building a reputation as responsible, reliable, and excellent with children of all ages. Jessica was an honor student at her high school, involved in student government and volunteer work, and she used her babysitting income to save for college expenses. She had never experienced anything more challenging than a cranky toddler or a power outage during her years of childcare work. The Whitmore family had hired Jessica several times over the past year to care for their 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Tyler. The Whitmores lived in an isolated house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense woods and accessible only by a long, winding driveway that connected to a rarely traveled country road. The house was beautiful but remote, offering privacy and tranquility that the family valued, but that also meant their nearest neighbors were over a mile away. David and Patricia Whitmore were both physicians who occasionally needed evening child care when they attended medical conferences or social events related to their practice. They had always been impressed with Jessica's maturity and competence, and both Emma and Tyler adored her. Jessica enjoyed caring for the Whitmore children, as they were well-behaved, engaging, and the family always paid her generously for her services. On the evening of October 15th, the Whitmores asked Jessica to babysit while they attended a medical association dinner in downtown Washington. They expected to be gone until approximately 11:30 p.m., giving Jessica plenty of time to help the children with homework, prepare dinner, oversee their bedtime routines, and settle in for a quiet evening of studying while the children slept. The arrangement seemed routine and straightforward, identical to many previous babysitting jobs Jessica had handled for the family. Jessica arrived at the Whitmore house at 5:30 p.m., just as David and Patricia were preparing to leave for their dinner. The parents reviewed the evening's schedule with Jessica, providing emergency contact information, reviewing the children's bedtime routines, and discussing any special instructions for the evening. Emma and Tyler were excited to see Jessica and immediately began showing her school projects and toys they wanted to share with her during the evening. The first few hours of the evening proceeded normally. Jessica helped Emma with her math homework while Tyler worked on a coloring project. And then she prepared a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup that both children enjoyed. After dinner, they played board games and watched a family-friendly movie until it was time for Tyler's bedtime routine at 8 p.m. Jessica had just finished reading Tyler a bedtime story and was tucking him into bed when she heard what sounded like someone knocking on the front door. The knocking was slow and deliberate, with long pauses between each knock that created an ominous rhythm. Jessica found the timing strange, as the Whitmores weren't expecting any visitors, and the isolated location of their house meant that unexpected visitors were extremely rare. When Jessica looked through the front door's peephole, she saw a figure standing on the porch that made her blood run cold. The person was wearing what appeared to be a full-body bunny costume, complete with a large, grotesque rabbit head that had exaggerated features and what looked like stained or dirty fur. The costume was clearly not a cute, child-friendly bunny outfit, but something much more sinister and disturbing, with a twisted, nightmarish quality that immediately triggered Jessica's instincts that something was very wrong. The figure in the bunny costume stood motionless on the porch for several minutes, facing the door as if waiting for a response. Jessica did not answer the door or make any sound that might indicate someone was home, hoping that whoever was outside would simply leave. However, the figure remained on the porch, occasionally moving slightly but maintaining its position facing the front door. After about 10 minutes, the knocking resumed, this time more insistent and with a different rhythm. The person in the bunny costume was now knocking in sets of 3, with long pauses between each set, creating a pattern that felt deliberately menacing. Jessica realized that this was not a case of mistaken identity or a harmless prank. Someone was intentionally trying to intimidate or frighten whoever was inside the house. Jessica quietly moved away from the front door and checked on Emma, who was still awake in her bedroom reading. She told Emma to stay in her room and keep her door locked, explaining that there was someone outside who shouldn't be there, and that they needed to be very quiet until the person left. Emma, sensing the seriousness in Jessica's voice, immediately complied and locked her bedroom door as instructed. The situation escalated when Jessica heard footsteps moving around the perimeter of the house, suggesting that the person in the bunny costume was now exploring the property and looking for other ways to gain access or to observe the occupants. Jessica could hear the footsteps moving past windows and around the back of the house, and she realized that whoever was outside was conducting a systematic examination of the house's layout and security. Jessica immediately called 911 from her cell phone, explaining to the dispatcher that there was an intruder on the property wearing a bunny costume, and that she was alone with 2 young children in an isolated house. The dispatcher took the call seriously and promised to send officers to the location, but warned Jessica that the remote location meant it would take at least 20 minutes for police to arrive at the scene. The dispatcher advised Jessica to stay on the line, keep the children in secure locations, and avoid any confrontation with the intruder. She was instructed to turn off all lights in the house to make it appear unoccupied, and to find a secure location where she and the children could hide until police arrived. The dispatcher also suggested that Jessica try to contact the children's parents to inform them of the situation. Jessica tried calling both David and Patricia Whitmore, but neither answered their phones, presumably because they were at the dinner event and had their phones silenced. She left urgent voicemail messages explaining the situation and asking them to call her back immediately. But she realized that she and the children would likely have to handle the situation alone until help arrived. The person in the bunny costume continued moving around the house, and Jessica could hear them testing windows and doors, apparently looking for unlocked entry points. The methodical nature of this behavior was particularly terrifying, as it suggested that this was not a random incident, but a planned attempt to gain access to the house. The person seemed to know that the house was occupied and appeared to be deliberately trying to create fear and anxiety among the occupants. At approximately 9:45 p.m., Jessica heard the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house, indicating that the intruder had found a way to breach the building's security. The sound came from what Jessica believed was the kitchen window, which was partially hidden from view by landscaping and would provide a relatively discreet entry point. Jessica realized that the person in the bunny costume was now inside the house, and that she and the children were in immediate danger. Jessica quickly gathered Emma and Tyler in Tyler's bedroom, which was located at the back of the house and had a window that could potentially be used as an escape route if necessary. She barricaded the bedroom door with furniture and called 911 again to report that the intruder had entered the house and that they needed immediate assistance. The dispatcher confirmed that police units were en route, but were still several minutes away from the location. The children were terrified, but followed Jessica's instructions to remain quiet and stay away from the windows. Emma helped Jessica move furniture to block the door, while Tyler hid under his bed, as instructed. Jessica could hear footsteps moving through the house, and it became clear that the person in the bunny costume was systematically searching the rooms, apparently looking for the occupants. The psychological terror of the situation was intensified by the deliberate, methodical nature of the intruder's search. Rather than rushing through the house or making loud noises, the person moved slowly and quietly, opening doors and checking rooms with a patience that suggested they were enjoying the process of creating fear. Jessica could hear closet doors opening, furniture being moved, and other sounds that indicated a thorough search was being conducted. At one point, Jessica heard the intruder approaching the bedroom where she and the children were hiding. The footsteps stopped outside their door, and Jessica could see the doorknob slowly turning as someone tested whether the door was locked. When the door didn't open due to the furniture barricade, the person began pushing against it, creating a terrifying scraping sound as the furniture moved slightly under the pressure. The children were crying quietly, and Jessica had to use all her strength and courage to remain calm and focused on their safety. She whispered reassurances to Emma and Tyler, while simultaneously preparing to defend them if the intruder managed to break through their barricade. She had found a baseball bat in Tyler's closet and was prepared to use it if necessary to protect the children. The pushing against the door continued for several minutes, with the intruder apparently testing the strength of the barricade and trying to determine the best way to gain entry. Jessica could hear heavy breathing and occasional sounds that might have been muffled speech, but she couldn't make out any words or determine the intruder's intentions beyond the obvious threat they represented. Suddenly, the pressure against the door stopped, and Jessica heard footsteps moving away from their location. For a moment, she hoped that the intruder had given up and left the house. But then she realized that the person might be looking for tools or other means to break through their defenses. The temporary reprieve gave Jessica a chance to check her phone and see that the police estimated arrival time was still 8 minutes away. The intruder returned to their door with what sounded like a tool or weapon and began striking the door and surrounding wall with systematic, powerful blows. The sound was terrifying, and Jessica realized that their barricade would not hold for much longer. She made the decision to prepare for escape through the bedroom window, helping Emma and Tyler move to the window area while continuing to monitor the door. Jessica managed to open the bedroom window and was preparing to help the children climb out when she heard the most terrifying sound of the entire ordeal. The person in the bunny costume was speaking in a distorted, unnatural voice that seemed to be artificially altered. The voice was saying things like, "Come out and play," and "I just want to meet you," in a sing-song tone that was clearly intended to be menacing rather than reassuring. The combination of the grotesque costume, the systematic stalking behavior, and the disturbing voice created a level of psychological terror that Jessica had never experienced. She realized that this person was not just a burglar or random intruder, but someone who was specifically targeting the family and seemed to derive pleasure from creating fear and terror. Just as Jessica was helping Tyler climb through the window, she heard the blessed sound of police sirens approaching the house. The intruder apparently heard the sirens as well, because the pounding on the door stopped immediately, and Jessica could hear rapid footsteps moving through the house toward what she assumed was the exit point. The police arrived with multiple units and immediately began searching the property and surrounding woods for the intruder. Jessica and the children were safely evacuated from the house and taken to a police station where they could provide detailed statements about their experience. The officers who responded to the call were experienced professionals, but even they seemed disturbed by the nature of the incident. and the psychological terror that had been inflicted on the victims. The investigation revealed that the person in the bunny costume had escaped into the dense woods surrounding the Whitmore property before police arrived. Despite an extensive search involving multiple agencies and tracking dogs, no trace of the intruder was found. The costume appeared to be homemade or significantly modified, with features that were designed to be frightening rather than cute or entertaining. Forensic analysis of the house revealed that the intruder had spent considerable time on the property before breaking in, apparently observing the house and planning the approach. Footprints and other evidence suggested that the person had been watching the house for some time, possibly waiting for the right opportunity to create maximum fear and terror. The most disturbing aspect of the investigation was the discovery that similar incidents had occurred in other isolated areas of Virginia and Maryland over the previous 2 years. In each case, a person in a bunny costume had stalked families in remote houses, creating terror through systematic intimidation and psychological manipulation. None of the previous incidents had resulted in physical harm to the victims, but all had created lasting trauma and fear. The FBI became involved in the investigation due to the multi-state nature of the crimes and the possibility that the incidents were connected to a larger pattern of stalking and intimidation. Behavioral analysts determined that the person responsible was likely someone who derived psychological satisfaction from creating fear and terror, and who had escalated their behavior over time to create more intense and prolonged experiences for their victims. The psychological impact on Jessica, Emma, and Tyler was significant and required ongoing therapeutic intervention. Jessica, despite her maturity and previous experience handling challenging situations, struggled with anxiety and fear that persisted long after the incident. She had difficulty sleeping, experienced panic attacks when alone, and found it challenging to continue babysitting even for families she knew well. Emma and Tyler both showed signs of trauma that affected their daily lives and development. Emma became fearful of being alone and had difficulty sleeping in her own room, while Tyler developed anxiety around strangers and became clingy with his parents. Both children required extensive counseling to process their experience and develop coping strategies for managing their fear and anxiety. The Whitmore family was deeply affected by the incident and the realization that their home had been targeted by someone who had apparently been watching them for an extended period. They installed comprehensive security systems, moved to a less isolated location, and struggled with feelings of violation and vulnerability that persisted long after the incident. The case remained unsolved for over a year, with periodic reports of similar incidents in other areas, but no arrests or identification of the person responsible. The lack of resolution added to the psychological impact on the victims, as they lived with the knowledge that the person who had terrorized them was still free and potentially targeting other families. The breakthrough in the case came when a security camera at a rural gas station captured footage of someone purchasing supplies that matched materials found at the Whitmore house. The footage showed a man in his 30s removing a bunny costume from his car and disposing of it in a dumpster behind the station. Police were able to recover the costume and extract DNA evidence that led to the identification and arrest of Thomas Mitchell, a 34-year-old man with a history of stalking and intimidation charges. Mitchell's arrest revealed that he had been systematically targeting isolated families with young children, using the bunny costume as a way to create maximum psychological terror while maintaining anonymity. He had been escalating his behavior over time, spending longer periods stalking his victims and becoming more aggressive in his attempts to gain access to their homes. The legal proceedings against Mitchell were complicated by the challenge of proving intent and the psychological nature of his crimes. However, the evidence from multiple incidents, combined with his confession and psychological evaluation, resulted in his conviction on multiple charges, including stalking, breaking and entering, and terroristic threatening. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and required to undergo extensive psychological treatment. The recovery process for all the victims was lengthy and required ongoing support from mental health professionals who specialized in trauma recovery. Jessica eventually returned to babysitting, but only for families she knew extremely well, and only in houses with comprehensive security systems. Emma and Tyler both recovered from their trauma, but remained more cautious and security conscious than typical children their age. The case highlighted the vulnerability of families in isolated locations and the importance of comprehensive security measures for homes in remote areas. It also demonstrated the lasting psychological impact that can result from terroristic behavior, even when no physical harm occurs to the victims. The Bunnyman encounter experienced by Jessica Martinez and the Whitmore family represents one of the most psychologically terrifying babysitting incidents ever documented. Thomas Mitchell's systematic stalking and intimidation created lasting trauma for all involved and demonstrated how predators can use psychological terror as a weapon against innocent families. The case serves as a stark reminder that isolation can create vulnerability and that comprehensive security measures are essential for protecting families from those who would exploit their fear and vulnerability for their own twisted satisfaction. Let's move to our fifth story, and this one will chill you to the bone because it's based on the most famous babysitter horror story of all time. Except what I'm about to tell you actually happened. This isn't an urban legend passed down through generations of frightened teenagers. This is the real case that inspired the legend. And the truth is far more terrifying than any story you've ever heard whispered around a campfire. 19-year-old Carol Williams was a college sophomore at Northwestern University, working part-time as a babysitter to help pay for her education expenses. It was March 1979, and Carol had been babysitting for the affluent Brennan family in Highland Park, Illinois, for almost 6 months. She was known throughout the wealthy suburb as one of the most reliable and trustworthy babysitters available, with a reputation for being responsible, mature, and excellent with children of all ages. The Brennan family lived in a sprawling 3-story Victorian mansion that had been in the family for generations. Dr. Richard Brennan was a prominent surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, while his wife Margaret was active in local charity organizations and social circles. They had 3 children: 14-year-old Jennifer, 10-year-old Michael, and 7-year-old Sarah. The house was elegant and beautifully maintained, but its age and size created numerous hiding places and dark corners that had always made Carol slightly uncomfortable during her evening babysitting duties. On the evening of March 18, 1979, Dr. and Mrs. Brennan asked Carol to babysit while they attended a medical foundation gala in downtown Chicago. They expected to return around midnight, giving Carol plenty of time to help the children with homework, prepare dinner, oversee bedtime routines, and settle in for what she anticipated would be a quiet evening of studying while the children slept. Carol arrived at the Brennan house at 6 p.m., just as Dr. and Mrs. Brennan were preparing to leave for their evening out. The parents reviewed the evening schedule with Carol, providing emergency contact information and discussing any special instructions for the night. Jennifer, Michael, and Sarah were excited to see Carol, as she had become almost like a big sister to them over the months she had been caring for them. The first part of the evening proceeded normally. Carol helped Michael with his science project, while Jennifer worked on algebra homework and Sarah practiced piano. After homework time, Carol prepared spaghetti and meatballs for dinner, which all 3 children enjoyed. Following dinner, they played board games and watched television until it was time for Sarah's bedtime at 8:30 p.m. Carol had just finished reading Sarah a bedtime story and was tucking her into her second-floor bedroom when the telephone rang. The call came at exactly 9:47 p.m., a time that would be burned into Carol's memory forever. She answered the phone in the hallway outside Sarah's room, expecting it to be Dr. or Mrs. Brennan checking in on the evening's activities. Instead, Carol heard a man's voice that was low, gravelly, and immediately unsettling. The voice spoke slowly and deliberately, with pauses between words that created an ominous rhythm. "Have you checked on the children?" the voice asked, and then the line went dead before Carol could respond. The question struck Carol as odd and disturbing. Why would someone call to ask about the children? The voice didn't sound like anyone she recognized, and the tone was menacing rather than concerned. Carol assumed it might have been a wrong number or perhaps a prank call, though the timing and specific wording made her uncomfortable. Carol checked on all 3 children after the call. Sarah was already asleep in her room, Michael was reading in his bedroom, and Jennifer was finishing homework at her desk. Everyone seemed safe and secure. So Carol tried to dismiss the strange phone call as a random incident that didn't require further concern. 20 minutes later, at 10:07 p.m., the phone rang again. Carol answered it quickly, hoping not to wake Sarah, and heard the same gravelly voice asking the exact same question. "Have you checked on the children?" This time, Carol tried to respond, asking who was calling and what they wanted. But again, the line went dead immediately after the question was asked. The repetition of the same question in the same menacing tone made Carol realize that this was not a wrong number or random prank call. Someone was deliberately calling the Brennan house and asking about the children in a way that felt threatening and ominous. Carol began to feel genuinely frightened and considered calling Dr. and Mrs. Brennan to report the strange calls. Before Carol could decide whether to contact the parents, the phone rang a third time at 10:23 p.m. This time, when she answered, the voice was slightly different, more urgent and with what sounded like suppressed excitement. "Have you checked on the children?" the voice asked. But this time it was followed by heavy breathing and what might have been muffled laughter before the line went dead. Carol was now genuinely terrified and realized that someone was systematically harassing the family with calls that seemed designed to create fear and anxiety. She decided to call the police to report the threatening phone calls and to ask for advice about how to handle the situation. She also tried calling Dr. and Mrs. Brennan at the gala, but was told they were not available to take calls during the event. When Carol called the police, she spoke with Sergeant Robert Martinez, who took her report seriously and advised her to keep a log of any additional calls, including the exact time and any details about what was said. He explained that threatening phone calls were taken seriously, especially when children were involved, and that if the calls continued, they could trace the origin of the calls to identify the caller. Sergeant Martinez also suggested that Carol gather the children in one room where she could keep them all in sight, and that she should call 911 immediately if she felt that anyone was in immediate danger. He assured her that patrol units would increase their presence in the neighborhood, and that officers would drive by the Brennan house periodically throughout the evening. At 10:41 p.m., the phone rang again, and Carol almost didn't answer it. However, she realized that she needed to gather information for the police, so she picked up the receiver. This time, the voice was different again, more excited and with an edge of anticipation that was deeply disturbing. "Have you checked on the children?" the voice asked. But this time it was followed by the sound of what might have been footsteps, and then the line went dead. The suggestion of footsteps in the background of the call made Carol realize that the caller might not be calling from a distant location, but could potentially be somewhere near the house or even inside the house. This thought filled her with terror, and she immediately began checking all the doors and windows to ensure they were locked and secure. Carol gathered Jennifer and Michael in the living room and explained that there had been some strange phone calls and that they needed to stay together until their parents returned home. Both children could see that Carol was frightened, and they became anxious about what was happening. Jennifer, being older, asked if they were in danger, and Carol tried to reassure them while remaining honest about the concerning nature of the calls. At 11:02 p.m., the phone rang again, and this time Carol was prepared with a pen and paper to document everything about the call. When she answered, the voice was now clearly excited and seemed to be speaking from a location with different acoustics, somewhere that created an echo or reverberation that hadn't been present in the earlier calls. "Have you checked on the children?" the voice asked. But this time it was followed by additional words that made Carol's blood run cold. "You really should check on the children. They're so quiet upstairs." The line went dead, leaving Carol staring at the phone in horror. The reference to the children being quiet upstairs was terrifying because it suggested that the caller had knowledge of the house's layout and the children's locations. Carol realized that this was no longer just a series of threatening phone calls. This was someone who appeared to have intimate knowledge of the family and their home. Carol immediately called 911 and reported the escalation in the threatening calls, specifically mentioning the caller's reference to the children being upstairs. The dispatcher took the call very seriously and promised to send officers to the house immediately. Carol was advised to gather all the children in one secure location and to stay on the line with the dispatcher until police arrived. As Carol was gathering the children and preparing to wait for police, she heard a sound from upstairs that made her heart stop. It was the sound of a door closing, followed by what might have been footsteps in the hallway above them. The sound was faint but distinct, and it came from the area where the children's bedrooms were located. Carol realized with absolute terror that someone might actually be inside the house, possibly in the upstairs area where Sarah was sleeping. She told Jennifer and Michael to stay exactly where they were and not to move or make any noise. And then she crept quietly toward the staircase to listen for any additional sounds from the second floor. As Carol stood at the bottom of the stairs, straining to hear any sounds from above, the phone rang again. This time, she answered it while remaining at the base of the staircase, and the voice she heard was triumphant and excited. "Have you checked on the children? I think you really need to check on them now." The call was coming from inside the house. Carol could hear the echo of the voice coming both through the phone receiver and faintly from somewhere upstairs. The caller was in the house, somewhere on the second floor, and had been making the threatening calls from an upstairs phone extension. Carol dropped the phone and screamed for Jennifer and Michael to run outside immediately. She raced up the stairs to check on Sarah, her heart pounding with terror as she realized that someone had been in the house during all the previous phone calls, possibly watching them and planning whatever was about to happen. When Carol reached Sarah's bedroom, she found the door slightly ajar, though she was certain she had closed it completely after tucking the child into bed. Inside the room, Sarah's bed was empty, with the covers pulled back as if someone had taken her from the bed. There was no sign of struggle, but Sarah was simply gone. Carol searched frantically through the upstairs rooms, calling Sarah's name and looking in closets, under beds, and anywhere a 7-year-old child might hide or be hidden. As she searched, she could hear police sirens approaching the house, and she ran downstairs to meet the officers and report that Sarah was missing. The police response was immediate and comprehensive. Officers secured the house and began a systematic search of every room, closet, and possible hiding place. Detective Linda Foster took charge of the investigation and immediately called for additional units, including K-9 teams and specialists trained in child abduction cases. The search of the house revealed evidence that someone had indeed been hiding in the third-floor attic area, which was accessible through a concealed door in the upstairs hallway. The attic space contained blankets, food supplies, and what appeared to be a makeshift living area where someone had been staying for an extended period. Most disturbing was the discovery of photographs of the Brennan family and detailed notes about their daily routines and schedules. The investigation revealed that the intruder had been living in the attic space for weeks, possibly months, observing the family's activities and planning his actions. He had access to the house's phone system through an extension in the attic, which explained how he had been able to make the threatening calls from inside the house while remaining undetected. The search for Sarah continued through the night and into the following day, with hundreds of volunteers joining law enforcement officers in combing through the surrounding neighborhoods and wooded areas. The FBI was called in to assist with the investigation due to the suspected child abduction, and the case received extensive media coverage throughout the Chicago area. The breakthrough came when a neighbor reported seeing a man carrying what appeared to be a sleeping child toward a car parked on a side street near the Brennan house around 11:15 p.m. on the night of the incident. The neighbor had thought it was a father carrying his child to the car and hadn't realized the significance until hearing about Sarah's disappearance. Police were able to trace the license plate number provided by the witness to Thomas Kellerman, a 34-year-old man with a history of breaking and entering charges and previous arrests for stalking. When officers arrived at Kellerman's apartment, they found Sarah unharmed but traumatized, along with evidence that Kellerman had been planning the abduction for months. The investigation revealed that Kellerman had been systematically stalking the Brennan family, learning their routines and gaining access to their house through a basement window that had a faulty lock. He had been living in their attic space intermittently, coming and going when the family was away, and observing their activities to plan his crime. Kellerman's plan had been to terrorize the babysitter with threatening phone calls while he prepared to abduct one of the children. He had chosen Sarah because she was the youngest and would be easiest to control, and he had waited for an evening when the parents were away, and only the babysitter was present to supervise the children. The psychological evaluation of Kellerman revealed that he suffered from severe mental illness and had been escalating his criminal behavior over several years. He had previously broken into other homes and had been planning more serious crimes, with the Brennan family abduction serving as what he considered a test of his abilities. The legal proceedings against Kellerman were swift and decisive. He was charged with kidnapping, breaking and entering, stalking, and terroristic threatening. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including the physical evidence from the attic, witness testimony, and his own confession. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The recovery process for the Brennan family and Carol was lengthy and difficult. Sarah required extensive therapy to address the trauma of her abduction, while Jennifer and Michael struggled with anxiety and fear about their safety. Carol experienced severe post-traumatic stress and was unable to continue babysitting for several years. The case had a profound impact on the Highland Park community and led to increased awareness about home security and the importance of checking for signs of unauthorized entry. Many families installed comprehensive security systems and began conducting regular inspections of their homes to ensure no one was hiding in attic spaces or other concealed areas. The Brennan family eventually moved to a different house, unable to feel safe in the home where they had been stalked and violated. Dr. and Mrs. Brennan became advocates for improved home security measures and worked with local law enforcement to educate other families about the warning signs of stalking and home invasion. The case also contributed to changes in how law enforcement responds to reports of threatening phone calls, particularly when children are involved. The systematic nature of Kellerman's calls and his escalation to abduction demonstrated that such calls should always be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. Years later, the case became the inspiration for numerous urban legends and horror stories about babysitters receiving threatening phone calls. However, the real story was far more terrifying than any fictional account, as it involved actual stalking, home invasion, and child abduction by someone who had been systematically planning his crimes for months. The Man Upstairs case experienced by Carol Williams and the Brennan family represents one of the most terrifying examples of how predators can exploit family routines and home vulnerabilities to commit serious crimes. Thomas Kellerman's systematic stalking and the psychological terror he created through his threatening phone calls demonstrated the importance of taking all threats seriously and maintaining comprehensive security measures to protect families from those who would exploit their vulnerability and trust. Let's move to our sixth story. And I need to warn you that what happened to 15-year-old Madison Parker will shake your faith in the people we trust most with our children. This isn't about a stranger breaking into a home or making threatening phone calls. This is about someone who used the sacred trust of child care as a hunting ground, and how one teenager's courage prevented an unthinkable crime. Madison Parker was a responsible high school sophomore living in the quiet town of Cedar Falls, Iowa. She had been babysitting for local families since she was 13, building a solid reputation as mature, reliable, and excellent with children. Madison was an honor roll student, active in her church youth group, and used her babysitting income to save for a car and college expenses. She had never encountered anything more challenging than a stubborn toddler refusing bedtime or helping with difficult homework assignments. The Morrison family had used Madison's babysitting services several times over the past year. James Morrison worked as an accountant for a local firm, while his wife Linda was a part-time teacher at the elementary school. They had 2 children, 9-year-old Ashley and 6-year-old Connor. The Morrisons lived in a comfortable ranch-style home in a safe neighborhood where children played outside until dark and neighbors looked out for each other. On the evening of November 12th, Linda Morrison called Madison with an unusual request. Their regular babysitter had canceled at the last minute, and they desperately needed someone to watch Ashley and Connor while they attended James's company holiday party. However, Linda explained that she had arranged for her brother-in-law, Derek Morrison, to help with the babysitting duties since it would be a longer evening than usual, potentially lasting until 1 a.m. Derek Morrison was James's younger brother, a 28-year-old man who had recently moved to Cedar Falls after losing his job in Des Moines. He was staying with James and Linda temporarily while he looked for new employment and got back on his feet. Linda explained that Derek had volunteered to help with the children and that Madison would essentially be the primary babysitter, while Derek provided additional adult supervision and assistance. Madison had never met Derek, but Linda spoke highly of him, describing him as good with children and reliable. She explained that Derek had helped care for his own nieces and nephews in the past, and that having an adult present would actually make the evening easier for Madison. The arrangement seemed reasonable, and Madison agreed to the job, especially since the Morrisons were offering to pay her extra for the longer evening and additional responsibilities. Madison arrived at the Morrison house at 6 p.m., just as James and Linda were preparing to leave for their party. They introduced her to Derek, who seemed friendly and outgoing, immediately engaging with Ashley and Connor and demonstrating what appeared to be genuine affection for the children. Derek was tall and athletic, with an easy smile and confident manner that initially put Madison at ease. Linda reviewed the evening schedule with both Madison and Derek, explaining the children's bedtime routines, emergency contact information, and any special instructions for the night. Ashley and Connor seemed comfortable with Derek, calling him Uncle Derek and showing him toys and games they wanted to play. The family dynamic appeared normal and healthy, with no obvious signs of tension or concern. The first few hours of the evening proceeded smoothly. Madison helped Ashley with her homework while Derek played video games with Connor. And then they all worked together to prepare dinner. Derek seemed knowledgeable about the children's preferences and routines, and he was helpful in managing their activities and keeping them entertained. Madison began to relax and appreciate having adult assistance with the babysitting duties. After dinner, they watched a family movie together, with Derek making popcorn and creating a fun, relaxed atmosphere that the children clearly enjoyed. Madison noticed that Derek was attentive to the children's needs and seemed genuinely interested in their activities and conversations. He asked thoughtful questions about their school experiences and hobbies, and he shared appropriate stories about his own childhood that made them laugh. As the evening progressed, Madison began to notice subtle changes in Derek's behavior that made her slightly uncomfortable. He started making comments about how mature and responsible she was for her age, and how impressed he was with her babysitting skills. While these comments seemed like compliments, something about Derek's tone and the way he looked at her when he made them felt inappropriate and made Madison uneasy. Derek also began finding excuses to be physically closer to Madison, offering to help her with tasks that didn't require assistance, and positioning himself in ways that invaded her personal space. When they were cleaning up after dinner, he would stand unnecessarily close to her at the sink. And when they were watching the movie, he chose to sit next to her on the couch, despite there being other seating options available. Madison tried to dismiss her discomfort as overthinking the situation, reasoning that Derek was just being friendly and helpful. However, her instincts were telling her that something about his behavior was not appropriate, and she began to feel increasingly anxious about being alone with him after the children went to bed. The situation escalated when it was time for Ashley and Connor's bedtime routines at 8:30 p.m. Derek volunteered to help get Connor ready for bed, while Madison assisted Ashley. And initially, this seemed like a helpful division of labor. However, Madison noticed that Derek was taking an unusually long time with Connor's bedtime routine, and she could hear him engaging in lengthy conversations with the 6-year-old that seemed unnecessary for a simple bedtime preparation. After Madison finished helping Ashley get ready for bed, she went to check on Derek and Connor. She found Derek sitting quietly on Connor's bed, speaking to him in a low voice. At first, the conversation seemed gentle, but the topics being discussed didn't feel appropriate for bedtime. Derek was asking Connor questions that, while framed as concern for his well-being, struck Madison as oddly timed and deeply unsettling. Something about the exchange felt off, and it immediately put her on edge. Madison interrupted the conversation, suggesting that it was time for Connor to go to sleep. And Derek immediately changed his demeanor, becoming jovial and appropriate again. However, Madison had heard enough of the conversation to realize that Derek's questions were not normal or appropriate, and she began to suspect that his intentions toward the children might not be as innocent as they appeared. After both children were settled in their beds, Madison and Derek returned to the living room, where Derek's behavior became even more concerning. He began making more personal comments about Madison's appearance and maturity, telling her that she was very developed for her age and that she seemed much older than 15. These comments made Madison extremely uncomfortable, and she began to realize that Derek's inappropriate interest might extend beyond the children to include her as well. Derek also began asking Madison personal questions about her dating experience, whether she had a boyfriend, and what kinds of activities she enjoyed with friends. When Madison gave brief, evasive answers, Derek persisted with more detailed questions that felt invasive and inappropriate. He seemed particularly interested in whether Madison had ever been alone with older men and how she felt about age differences in relationships. As the evening continued, Derek's behavior became increasingly predatory and concerning. He began making physical contact with Madison under the guise of friendly gestures, touching her shoulder when he spoke to her, brushing against her when they moved around the room, and finding excuses to be in close physical proximity. Madison tried to maintain distance and avoid the contact, but Derek was persistent and seemed to be testing her boundaries. Around 10:30 p.m., Derek suggested that they watch a movie together while they waited for James and Linda to return home. He chose a film that contained mature content and sexual themes, explaining that since Madison was mature for her age, she would probably enjoy something more sophisticated than typical teenage entertainment. The choice of movie, combined with his previous comments and behavior, made Madison realize that Derek was deliberately trying to create a sexually charged atmosphere. During the movie, Derek moved closer to Madison on the couch and began making comments about the romantic scenes, asking Madison what she thought about the relationships portrayed and whether she had ever experienced similar situations. His questions became increasingly personal and inappropriate, and Madison began to feel trapped and frightened by the direction of the conversation. The situation reached a crisis point when Derek began touching Madison inappropriately during the movie, initially in ways that could be dismissed as accidental but escalating to clearly intentional sexual contact. When Madison tried to move away from him, Derek became more aggressive, telling her that she was acting like a child and that she should appreciate the attention from an older, experienced man. Madison realized that she was in serious danger and that Derek's intentions were clearly predatory. She understood that he had likely volunteered to help with babysitting specifically to gain access to her and possibly to the children, and that his friendly, helpful demeanor had been a calculated deception designed to lower her guard and create opportunities for abuse. When Derek attempted to escalate his physical contact further, Madison made the brave decision to resist and fight back. She pushed him away forcefully and told him clearly that his behavior was inappropriate and that she wanted him to stop immediately. Derek's response was to become angry and threatening, telling Madison that no one would believe her if she reported his behavior and that she had been asking for it by being friendly and accepting his help. Derek's threatening response confirmed Madison's worst fears about his intentions and made her realize that she needed to take immediate action to protect herself and potentially the children. She told Derek that she was going to call the police if he didn't leave her alone, and she moved toward the phone to demonstrate that she was serious about her threat. Derek's reaction to Madison's threat was to become more aggressive and desperate. He grabbed her arm to prevent her from reaching the phone and told her that she was making a big mistake by resisting him. He explained that he had been nice to her and that she should be grateful for his attention rather than fighting against it. His words revealed the twisted thinking that had led him to believe that his predatory behavior was somehow acceptable or desired. Madison managed to break free from Derek's grip and ran toward the children's bedrooms, both to check on their safety and to put distance between herself and Derek. She found both Ashley and Connor sleeping peacefully, apparently unaware of the dangerous situation developing in their home. However, Madison realized that she needed to protect them as well as herself from Derek's predatory behavior. Derek followed Madison toward the children's rooms, and his behavior became even more threatening and desperate. He told Madison that she had ruined everything by not cooperating with him, and that he was going to have to make sure she didn't cause problems for him. The threatening nature of his words made Madison realize that Derek might be capable of violence if he felt cornered or exposed. Madison made the critical decision to barricade herself and the children in Ashley's bedroom while she called for help. She woke both children and explained that there was a problem with Uncle Derek and that they needed to stay quiet and safe while she called their parents and the police. Despite their confusion and fear, both children followed Madison's instructions and helped her move furniture to block the bedroom door. Madison called 911 from her cell phone, explaining to the dispatcher that she was babysitting and that an adult male in the house had attempted to sexually assault her and was now threatening her and the children. The dispatcher took the call seriously and promised to send officers immediately, while also advising Madison to stay on the line and keep herself and the children secure until help arrived. Derek continued to try to gain access to the bedroom, alternating between pleading with Madison to be reasonable and threatening her with consequences if she didn't cooperate with him. His behavior confirmed that his intentions had been predatory from the beginning, and that he had likely planned to assault Madison and possibly the children during the evening. The police arrived within 8 minutes of Madison's call, finding Derek attempting to break down the bedroom door where Madison and the children were hiding. Officers immediately arrested Derek and secured the scene, while paramedics checked on Madison and the children to ensure they had not been physically harmed during the incident. The investigation revealed that Derek Morrison had a history of sexual assault allegations and had been fired from his previous job due to inappropriate behavior toward female co-workers. He had been staying with his brother's family while avoiding legal consequences for his previous actions, and he had apparently seen the babysitting arrangement as an opportunity to access potential victims. Detective Sarah Chen, who specialized in sexual assault cases, interviewed Madison extensively about Derek's behavior and the escalation of his predatory actions throughout the evening. Madison's detailed account provided crucial evidence about Derek's methods and intentions, and her brave resistance had prevented what could have been a serious sexual assault. The investigation further uncovered that Derek had been engaging in concerning conversations with the children, raising red flags about his intentions. Authorities suspected that his troubling behavior may not have been limited to Madison alone. To ensure the children's well-being, child psychologists were brought in to speak with Ashley and Connor and assess whether any inappropriate conduct had occurred during Derek's time in their home. Fortunately, the interviews with Ashley and Connor revealed that Derek had not previously engaged in overtly inappropriate behavior with them. Though both children reported that he had asked them weird questions about their bodies and had sometimes made them feel uncomfortable. The children's reports confirmed that Derek's behavior toward Madison represented an escalation of predatory patterns that had been developing during his time in the Morrison household. The legal proceedings against Derek moved quickly and with clear direction. He faced multiple charges related to endangerment, threats, and inappropriate conduct. Madison's testimony played a key role in demonstrating a consistent pattern of disturbing behavior and an alarming escalation. Though Derek tried to argue that his actions had been misunderstood, the evidence, including his prior incidents and threatening behavior, left little room for doubt. Derek was ultimately sentenced to 8 years in prison and required to register as a sex offender upon his release. He was also prohibited from having unsupervised contact with minors and required to undergo extensive psychological treatment to address his predatory behavior patterns. The recovery process for Madison was challenging and required ongoing support from counselors who specialized in sexual assault trauma. Despite her brave resistance and successful prevention of the assault, Madison struggled with anxiety, trust issues, and feelings of vulnerability that persisted long after the incident. She required extensive therapy to process her experience and develop coping strategies for managing her trauma. The Morrison family was devastated by the revelation of Derek's predatory behavior and the realization that they had unknowingly put Madison and their children at risk by trusting him. James Morrison struggled with guilt about his brother's actions and the failure to recognize the warning signs of Derek's dangerous behavior. The family required counseling to address their trauma and to rebuild their sense of safety and security. The case had significant implications for how families screen and monitor adults who have access to their children, even when those adults are family members. The Morrison family's experience demonstrated that predators often use family connections and positions of trust to gain access to potential victims, and that even close relatives can pose serious threats to children's safety. Madison's courage in resisting Derek's assault and protecting the children made her a hero in her community, though she struggled with the attention and praise that followed the incident. Her experience became a powerful example of how teenagers can protect themselves and others from predatory behavior. And her testimony helped convict a dangerous predator who might otherwise have continued to harm children. The predatory substitute case, experienced by Madison Parker and the Morrison family, represents one of the most insidious forms of child endangerment. The exploitation of family trust and child care arrangements by predators who use their positions of authority and access to target vulnerable victims. Derek Morrison's systematic grooming behavior and escalation to attempted assault demonstrated how predators can hide behind facades of helpfulness and family connection while planning serious crimes against children and teenagers. Years later, Madison has recovered from her traumatic experience and has become an advocate for child safety and sexual assault prevention. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that predators often use positions of trust and authority to access victims, and that children and teenagers must be educated about recognizing and resisting predatory behavior, even when it comes from trusted adults and family members. Let's move to our seventh story. And what I'm about to tell you will make every parent question whether they can truly trust anyone with their children. This isn't about a stranger or a predator. This is about a family's dark secret that turned a routine babysitting job into a nightmare that still haunts everyone involved. 18-year-old Rebecca Martinez was a responsible high school senior living in Riverside, California, working as a babysitter to save money for college. She had been babysitting for local families for over 3 years, building an excellent reputation as trustworthy, reliable, and wonderful with children of all ages. Rebecca was known throughout her neighborhood as the babysitter parents called when they needed someone they could absolutely depend on. And she had never experienced anything more challenging than a cranky toddler or a power outage during her years of childcare work. The Patterson family had contacted Rebecca through a local babysitting service, explaining that they needed someone to watch their 6-year-old son, Dylan, for an evening while they attended a wedding reception. Mark Patterson worked as a software engineer for a tech company, while his wife, Jennifer, was a marketing coordinator for a local nonprofit organization. They lived in a beautiful 2-story home in an upscale neighborhood, and they seemed like the perfect family, successful, well-educated, and devoted to their son. When Rebecca first met the Patterson family during her interview, she was immediately struck by how polite and well-behaved Dylan appeared to be. He was a quiet, thoughtful child who seemed mature for his age, with dark hair and serious eyes that made him seem older than 6. Dylan was articulate and intelligent, engaging Rebecca in conversation about his favorite books and school activities with a vocabulary that impressed her. However, Rebecca also noticed something slightly unusual about Dylan's behavior during their first meeting. He seemed unusually anxious about his parents leaving, clinging to his mother and repeatedly asking when they would return. When Jennifer tried to reassure him that Rebecca would take good care of him, Dylan became more agitated and insisted that he didn't want to be left alone with anyone. His reaction seemed more intense than typical separation anxiety, and Rebecca wondered if perhaps Dylan had experienced problems with previous babysitters. Mark and Jennifer explained Dylan's behavior as normal childhood anxiety, mentioning that he had always been a sensitive child who took time to warm up to new people. They assured Rebecca that once she and Dylan had a chance to get to know each other, he would be fine and would probably enjoy having someone new to play with. They provided detailed instructions about Dylan's evening routine, including his favorite activities, bedtime schedule, and any special needs or preferences he might have. The evening of November 28th started normally when Rebecca arrived at the Patterson house at 6 p.m. Mark and Jennifer were dressed for the wedding reception and seemed excited about their evening out. They reviewed Dylan's routine with Rebecca one more time, provided emergency contact information, and explained that they expected to return around 11:30 p.m. Dylan seemed resigned to his parents' departure, though he remained quiet and somewhat withdrawn as they prepared to leave. After Mark and Jennifer left, Rebecca tried to engage Dylan in conversation and activities to help him feel more comfortable with her presence. She asked about his favorite games, books, and television shows, and she offered to help him with any homework or projects he might have. Dylan was polite but distant, giving brief answers to her questions and showing little enthusiasm for the activities she suggested. Rebecca prepared dinner for Dylan according to his parents' instructions, making his favorite meal of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. During dinner, Dylan seemed to relax slightly and began talking more freely about his school experiences and friends. Rebecca was pleased to see him becoming more comfortable with her, and she began to think that the evening would proceed smoothly once Dylan overcame his initial shyness. After dinner, Rebecca suggested they play board games or watch a movie together, but Dylan asked if he could show her something special in his room first. Rebecca agreed, thinking that Dylan wanted to share his toys or collections with her, which seemed like a positive sign that he was beginning to trust her. She followed Dylan upstairs to his bedroom, expecting to see typical childhood treasures like action figures, books, or art projects. Dylan's bedroom was neat and well organized, with shelves full of books, educational toys, and games that reflected his parents' emphasis on learning and development. However, as Dylan began showing Rebecca his possessions, she noticed that he kept glancing toward his closet door with an expression that seemed anxious or fearful. When Rebecca asked about the closet, Dylan's demeanor changed dramatically, and he became visibly upset. "We're not supposed to open that door," Dylan said quietly, his voice filled with an emotion that Rebecca couldn't quite identify. "Mommy and Daddy said never to open it, especially when they're not home. They said something bad would happen if anyone opened it." Dylan's words were spoken with the seriousness of a child who had been given very specific and frightening instructions about something he didn't fully understand. Rebecca found Dylan's reaction to the closet door strange and concerning. While it wasn't unusual for parents to have rules about certain areas of their homes, the intensity of Dylan's fear and the ominous way he spoke about the consequences of opening the door seemed disproportionate to what should have been a simple storage space. She tried to reassure Dylan that she wouldn't open the closet door and that they could focus on other activities instead. However, as the evening progressed, Dylan's behavior became increasingly agitated and focused on the closet door. he would periodically glance toward it with obvious anxiety, and he seemed unable to concentrate on games or activities while they remained in his bedroom. When Rebecca suggested they go downstairs to watch television, Dylan eagerly agreed, seeming relieved to leave his room and the mysterious closet behind. Around 8:30 p.m., as they were watching a children's movie in the living room, Dylan suddenly became very quiet and still. Rebecca noticed that he was staring toward the staircase with an expression of intense concentration, as if he was listening for something. When she asked what was wrong, Dylan whispered that he thought he heard something coming from upstairs, specifically from the direction of his bedroom. Rebecca listened carefully, but couldn't hear anything unusual. She suggested that the sound might have been the house settling or perhaps a neighbor's activity. But Dylan shook his head and insisted that the sound was coming from inside his closet. "It's trying to get out," Dylan said in a voice barely above a whisper, his eyes wide with fear. "It always tries to get out when Mommy and Daddy aren't here." The way Dylan spoke about something being trapped in his closet was deeply disturbing to Rebecca. His words suggested that there was something alive in the closet that was trying to escape. And his obvious terror indicated that whatever was in there was something he feared greatly. Rebecca began to wonder if the Patterson family might be keeping a pet in the closet for some reason, though she couldn't imagine why they would confine an animal in such a small space. As Rebecca was trying to decide how to handle Dylan's fears about the closet, she heard a sound from upstairs that made her blood run cold. It was a rhythmic thumping or banging sound, as if something was hitting the inside of a door repeatedly. The sound was faint but distinct, and it was clearly coming from the direction of Dylan's bedroom. Dylan heard it too, and his reaction was immediate and intense. He began crying and begging Rebecca not to go upstairs to investigate. "Please don't go up there," Dylan pleaded, grabbing Rebecca's arm with surprising strength. "It gets angry when people try to look at it. Mommy and Daddy said it would hurt me if anyone opened the door. Please don't let it out." Dylan's terror was genuine and overwhelming, and Rebecca realized that whatever was causing the sound upstairs was something that had been a source of ongoing fear and trauma for this 6-year-old child. Rebecca was faced with a terrible dilemma. Her instincts told her that she needed to investigate the source of the sound to ensure that there was no danger to Dylan or herself. But Dylan's extreme fear and his parents' apparent warnings about the closet made her hesitate. She was also concerned that investigating might somehow make the situation worse, or put Dylan in danger if his parents had legitimate reasons for keeping whatever was in the closet secured. The thumping sound continued intermittently for several minutes, sometimes stopping for long periods and then resuming with renewed intensity. Each time the sound started again, Dylan would become more agitated and would beg Rebecca not to go upstairs. His fear was so intense that Rebecca began to suspect that whatever was in the closet might be something far more serious than a pet or stored belongings. Around 9:15 p.m., the thumping sound stopped completely, and Dylan seemed to relax slightly. He explained to Rebecca that it usually got quiet after a while, especially if no one went upstairs to bother it. Dylan's casual reference to this pattern suggested that the sounds from the closet were a regular occurrence that he had learned to expect and fear. Rebecca realized that Dylan had been living with this terrifying situation for some time, and that his parents were aware of whatever was causing the disturbance. Rebecca decided that she needed to call Mark and Jennifer to ask about the situation in Dylan's closet. She explained to Dylan that she was going to contact his parents to make sure everything was okay. And Dylan immediately became panicked, begging her not to tell them about the sounds. "They'll be angry if they know it was making noise," Dylan said through his tears. They said it's supposed to stay quiet when they're not home, and they'll blame me if it doesn't. Dylan's reaction revealed that he had been made to feel responsible for whatever was happening in his closet, and that he feared his parents' anger if the situation got out of control. This dynamic was deeply troubling to Rebecca, as it suggested that Dylan was being made to carry the burden of a frightening situation that was clearly beyond his ability to understand or manage. When Rebecca called Mark Patterson's cell phone, he answered immediately, and she could hear wedding reception music in the background. She explained that Dylan seemed very upset about something in his bedroom closet and that she had heard strange sounds coming from that area. Mark's response was immediate and alarming. He became very agitated and told Rebecca that she must not, under any circumstances, open the closet door or allow Dylan to go near it. "Listen to me very carefully," Mark said, his voice tight with what sounded like panic. "Do not go upstairs, do not open that closet door, and do not let Dylan out of your sight. We're leaving the reception right now and we'll be home in 20 minutes. Just keep Dylan downstairs and away from his bedroom until we get there." Mark's urgent tone and specific instructions confirmed that there was indeed something dangerous or disturbing in Dylan's closet, and that the situation was far more serious than Rebecca had initially realized. Rebecca tried to ask Mark what was in the closet and why it was dangerous, but he had already hung up the phone. She was left alone with Dylan, who had overheard enough of the conversation to know that his parents were coming home early because of the situation with the closet. Dylan became even more upset, crying that he would be in trouble because it had made noise while they were gone. As they waited for Mark and Jennifer to return, Rebecca tried to comfort Dylan and reassure him that he wasn't in trouble. However, she was deeply disturbed by the entire situation and the realization that she had been caring for a child who was living in fear of something that his own parents had apparently placed in his bedroom. The more she thought about the situation, the more concerned she became about Dylan's safety and well-being. Around 9:45 p.m., Rebecca heard a car pulling into the driveway, and within minutes, Mark and Jennifer burst through the front door. They were both still dressed in their wedding reception attire, but their faces were filled with anxiety and what looked like fear. Jennifer immediately went to Dylan and began asking him if he was okay and if anything had happened while they were gone. Mark went directly upstairs without explanation, and Rebecca could hear him moving around in Dylan's bedroom. After several minutes, he returned downstairs with a grim expression and nodded to Jennifer, apparently indicating that whatever situation they had been concerned about had been addressed. However, neither parent offered any explanation to Rebecca about what had been happening or what was in Dylan's closet. When Rebecca asked for an explanation about the situation, Mark and Jennifer exchanged glances, and then Mark said that there had been a family situation that they preferred not to discuss. He thanked Rebecca for calling them and for keeping Dylan safe, and he paid her for the evening's work. However, it was clear that they wanted her to leave immediately, and that they had no intention of providing any details about what had been happening in their home. As Rebecca was preparing to leave, Dylan approached her and whispered something that would haunt her for years to come. "Thank you for not opening the door. It would have been very angry if you had let it out." Dylan's words, combined with his obvious relief that his parents were home, confirmed that there was indeed something in that closet that posed a genuine threat to this child's safety and well-being. Rebecca left the Patterson house that night with deep concerns about Dylan's situation and the realization that she had been unknowingly placed in a dangerous situation by parents who had failed to inform her about serious risks in their home. She struggled with whether to report her concerns to authorities, as she had no concrete evidence of abuse or neglect. But she was haunted by Dylan's fear and the family's secretive behavior. The next day, Rebecca decided to contact the babysitting service that had referred her to the Patterson family to report her concerns about the situation. The service coordinator took her report seriously and agreed to investigate the family's background more thoroughly. The investigation revealed that the Patterson family had been reported to Child Protective Services on 2 previous occasions for suspected child abuse, though no formal charges had been filed. Further investigation revealed that Mark Patterson had a history of mental illness and had been hospitalized for psychiatric treatment on multiple occasions. The family had been receiving counseling services, and there were ongoing concerns about Mark's stability and his relationship with Dylan. The mysterious situation in Dylan's closet was apparently related to Mark's mental health issues and his increasingly erratic behavior toward his son. Child Protective Services conducted a welfare check on the Patterson family and discovered that Mark had been confining Dylan to his bedroom for extended periods as punishment, sometimes locking him in his closet as a form of discipline. The something that Dylan feared in his closet was actually his own traumatic memories of being locked in that small, dark space by his father. And the sounds Rebecca had heard were likely Dylan's own movements or the house settling, amplified by his terror and psychological trauma. The investigation revealed that Jennifer Patterson was aware of her husband's abusive behavior, but had been too frightened to report it or seek help. She had been complicit in the abuse by allowing Mark to continue his harmful treatment of Dylan and by creating elaborate stories to explain Dylan's behavioral problems to outsiders. The family's secretive behavior and Dylan's fear were the result of ongoing psychological abuse that had been hidden behind a facade of normalcy and success. Dylan was removed from his parents' custody and placed in protective care while the family situation was investigated and addressed. Mark Patterson was charged with child abuse and required to undergo extensive psychiatric treatment, while Jennifer was charged with child endangerment for failing to protect Dylan from his father's abuse. The legal proceedings were lengthy and complex, involving multiple agencies and specialists in child trauma and family dynamics. The recovery process for Dylan was extensive and required specialized therapy to address the psychological trauma he had experienced. Child psychologists worked with him to help him understand that he was not responsible for his father's behavior and that the fear he had experienced was the result of abuse rather than any real danger in his closet. Dylan's healing process was gradual and required ongoing support from trained professionals who specialized in childhood trauma recovery. Rebecca was deeply affected by her experience with the Patterson family and the realization that she had unknowingly been placed in a situation involving serious child abuse. She struggled with guilt about not recognizing the signs of abuse sooner and questioned whether she could have done more to help Dylan during that terrifying evening. She required counseling to process her own trauma and to develop strategies for recognizing and responding to signs of child abuse in future babysitting situations. The case had significant implications for babysitting services and the screening processes used to evaluate families seeking child care. The Patterson family's ability to hide their abusive behavior behind a facade of respectability demonstrated the need for more comprehensive background checks and ongoing monitoring of families who use child care services. The case also highlighted the importance of training babysitters to recognize signs of child abuse and providing them with resources for reporting suspected abuse. The babysitting service that had referred Rebecca to the Patterson family implemented new screening procedures and training programs as a result of this case. They began requiring more detailed background checks, including mental health evaluations and interviews with previous child care providers. They also developed training materials to help babysitters recognize signs of child abuse and understand their responsibilities for reporting suspected abuse to appropriate authorities. Years later, Dylan has recovered from his traumatic experience and has been placed in a loving adoptive family, where he is thriving and developing normally. His recovery serves as a testament to the resilience of children and the importance of providing appropriate support and intervention when abuse is discovered. Rebecca has continued babysitting, but has become an advocate for child safety and has helped train other babysitters to recognize and respond to signs of abuse. The vanishing child case experienced by Rebecca Martinez and Dylan Patterson represents one of the most insidious forms of child abuse. Psychological terror disguised as family discipline and hidden behind a facade of normalcy and success. Mark Patterson's systematic abuse of his son and the family's conspiracy of silence demonstrated how child abuse can be concealed even from trained child care providers who are specifically looking for signs of problems. The case serves as a powerful reminder that child abuse often occurs in families that appear successful and normal on the surface, and that babysitters and other child care providers must be trained to recognize subtle signs of abuse and trauma. Dylan's courage in surviving his ordeal and Rebecca's decision to report her concerns ultimately led to the discovery of serious abuse and the protection of a vulnerable child who might otherwise have continued to suffer in silence. Let's move to our 8th and final story. And I need to warn you that what happened to 20-year-old Amanda Foster will haunt your dreams and make you question everything you think you know about the innocent sounds of childhood. This isn't about monsters hiding in closets or imaginary friends. This is about a family secret so dark that it drove an experienced babysitter to the edge of sanity in a single night. Amanda Foster was a junior at Ohio State University, majoring in elementary education and working part-time as a babysitter to support herself through college. She had been caring for children since she was 16, building an exceptional reputation throughout the Columbus suburbs as mature, responsible, and unflappable in challenging situations. Amanda had handled everything from medical emergencies to severe behavioral problems, and parents throughout the area trusted her with their most precious possessions, their children. The Blackwood family had contacted Amanda through a university babysitting service, explaining that they needed someone to watch their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, for an evening while they attended a charity fundraiser downtown. Dr. Michael Blackwood was a prominent psychiatrist at Ohio State's Medical Center, while his wife Catherine was a successful real estate attorney. They lived in an elegant Victorian home in the historic German Village district, and they seemed like the perfect family. Educated, wealthy, and devoted to their daughter. When Amanda first met the Blackwood family during her initial interview, she was immediately struck by how mature and articulate Lily appeared to be for her age. She was a beautiful child, with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. But there was something in her expression that seemed older than her 8 years. A seriousness that was unusual for a child her age. Lily was polite and well-spoken, engaging Amanda in conversation about her school experiences and hobbies with a vocabulary that impressed her. However, Amanda also noticed something slightly unsettling about Lily's behavior during their first meeting. The child seemed unusually focused on her bedroom, frequently glancing toward the staircase and mentioning her room in ways that seemed anxious rather than excited. When Amanda asked about her favorite toys or activities, Lily would often redirect the conversation back to her bedroom, specifically mentioning her closet in ways that seemed both important and troubling to her. Dr. and Mrs. Blackwood explained Lily's preoccupation with her room as typical childhood behavior, mentioning that she had always been a sensitive child who found comfort in familiar spaces. They assured Amanda that Lily was well-behaved and easy to care for, though they mentioned that she sometimes had difficulty sleeping and might need extra reassurance during bedtime routines. They provided detailed instructions about Lily's evening schedule, including her favorite activities, meal preferences, and bedtime rituals. The evening of December 15th started normally when Amanda arrived at the Blackwood house at 6:30 p.m. Dr. and Mrs. Blackwood were dressed elegantly for their charity event and seemed excited about their evening out. They reviewed Lily's routine with Amanda one more time, provided emergency contact information, and explained that they expected to return around midnight. Lily seemed comfortable with Amanda's presence, though she remained focused on discussing her bedroom and the activities they might do there. After Dr. and Mrs. Blackwood left, Amanda spent time getting to know Lily better, asking about her school experiences, friends, and interests. Lily was engaging and talkative, but Amanda noticed that she kept steering their conversations back to her bedroom, and specifically to her closet. "Do you want to see my room?" Lily asked repeatedly, with an intensity that seemed unusual for a child simply wanting to show off her possessions. Amanda agreed to see Lily's room, thinking it would help the child feel more comfortable and would give her insight into Lily's interests and personality. She followed Lily upstairs to a beautifully decorated bedroom that reflected her parents' wealth and attention to detail. The room was filled with expensive toys, books, and furniture that created a perfect environment for a privileged child. However, as soon as they entered the bedroom, Amanda noticed that Lily's attention immediately focused on a large walk-in closet at the far end of the room. The closet door was closed, and there was something about the way Lily looked at it that made Amanda uncomfortable. The child's expression became serious and almost fearful, and she moved closer to Amanda as if seeking protection or comfort. "Do you hear that?" Lily asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you hear the screaming?" Amanda listened carefully, but heard nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of a house settling and distant traffic from the street outside. When she told Lily that she didn't hear anything, the child's expression became more intense and worried. "It's always screaming," Lily said, her eyes fixed on the closet door. "Every night, it screams and screams, but Mommy and Daddy say I'm not supposed to talk about it. They say it's just my imagination, but I know it's real. I can hear it crying for help." Lily's words were spoken with the conviction of a child who had been dismissed and disbelieved, but who remained certain of what she was experiencing. Amanda found Lily's claims about screaming coming from her closet deeply disturbing. Not because she believed there was actually someone in the closet, but because the child's obvious distress and fear suggested that she was experiencing something that was causing her significant psychological trauma. Whether the sounds were real or imaginary, Lily's terror was genuine and heartbreaking. Amanda tried to reassure Lily that she was safe and that they could investigate the closet together if it would help her feel better. However, when she approached the closet door, Lily became panicked and grabbed her arm, begging her not to open it. "Please don't open it," Lily pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "It gets louder when you open the door. It gets so loud that it hurts my ears, and then it won't stop for hours." The intensity of Lily's fear made Amanda realize that opening the closet might not be the best approach to helping the child feel safe. Instead, she suggested they go downstairs and engage in other activities that might help Lily relax and feel more comfortable. However, even after they left the bedroom, Lily remained agitated and kept glancing toward the ceiling, as if she was listening for sounds from her room above. During dinner, Lily's behavior became increasingly concerning. She would stop eating mid-bite and tilt her head as if listening for something, and she would frequently ask Amanda if she could hear it screaming. When Amanda assured her that she couldn't hear anything unusual, Lily would become frustrated and insist that the screaming was getting louder and more desperate. It knows you're here," Lily said during one of these episodes, her voice filled with a fear that was heartbreaking to witness. It always screams louder when there are strangers in the house. It wants someone to help it. But Mommy and Daddy won't let me tell anyone about it. They say people will think I'm crazy if I talk about the screaming. Amanda realized that Lily had been living with this terrifying experience for some time, and that her parents had been dismissing her fears rather than addressing them. Whether the child was experiencing auditory hallucinations, night terrors, or some other psychological phenomenon, it was clear that she needed professional help rather than being told to ignore her experiences. Around 8:30 p.m., as they were watching television in the living room, Lily suddenly became very still and focused, tilting her head toward the ceiling with an expression of intense concentration. "Do you hear it now?" she whispered urgently. "It's screaming so loud. How can you not hear it?" Amanda listened carefully and thought she might have heard a faint sound from upstairs. But she couldn't be sure if it was actually something unusual or just her imagination responding to Lily's distress. Lily's reaction to whatever she was hearing was immediate and intense. She began crying and covering her ears, rocking back and forth as if trying to block out sounds that were causing her physical pain. "Make it stop," she pleaded with Amanda. "Please make it stop screaming. It's been screaming for so long, and no one will help it." Amanda was faced with a terrible dilemma. She could see that Lily was experiencing genuine terror and distress, but she wasn't sure how to help her. The child's descriptions of screaming from her closet could be symptoms of a serious psychological condition that required professional intervention. Or they could be the result of trauma or abuse that she hadn't yet disclosed. Amanda decided to call Dr. and Mrs. Blackwood to discuss Lily's distress and to ask for guidance about how to help her. When she reached Dr. Blackwood's cell phone, she could hear the sounds of the charity event in the background. She explained that Lily was very upset about sounds she claimed to be hearing from her bedroom closet, and that she seemed to be experiencing significant psychological distress. Dr. Blackwood's response was immediate and dismissive. "Lily has an overactive imagination," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his psychiatric training. "She's been having these episodes for months, and we've been working with her to understand that the sounds aren't real. Just ignore her claims about screaming and redirect her attention to other activities. She'll calm down once she realizes you're not going to feed into her fantasies." Amanda found Dr. Blackwood's response troubling, particularly given his professional background in psychiatry. His dismissive attitude toward his daughter's obvious distress seemed inconsistent with what she would expect from a mental health professional. She tried to explain that Lily's fear seemed genuine and intense, but Dr. Blackwood cut her off and told her to handle the situation as he had instructed. After ending the call with Dr. Blackwood, Amanda returned to Lily, who was still covering her ears and crying. The child looked up at her with desperate hope and asked, "Did you tell Daddy about the screaming? Is he going to come home and make it stop?" When Amanda explained that her father had said the sounds weren't real, Lily's expression became one of profound sadness and resignation. "He never believes me," Lily said quietly, her tears continuing to flow. "Nobody ever believes me. But I know it's real, and I know someone is trapped in there and needs help. I can hear them crying and begging to be let out. But no one will listen to me." Lily's words were spoken with the heartbreaking conviction of a child who had been repeatedly dismissed and disbelieved by the adults who were supposed to protect and support her. As the evening progressed, Lily's distress continued to escalate. She would periodically stop whatever activity they were engaged in and listen intently to sounds that Amanda couldn't hear. Each time this happened, Lily would become more agitated and would beg Amanda to go upstairs and help whoever was trapped in her closet. Around 10:30 p.m., Lily's behavior reached a crisis point. She suddenly stood up from where they had been playing board games and announced that she couldn't ignore the screaming anymore. "I have to help them," she said with determination that was both admirable and heartbreaking. "Even if Mommy and Daddy get angry, I can't let them keep suffering." Before Amanda could stop her, Lily ran upstairs toward her bedroom. Amanda followed immediately, concerned about what the child might do in her distressed state. She found Lily standing in front of her closet door, her small hand reaching for the handle while tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry I couldn't help you before," Lily whispered to the closet door. "I'm going to open the door now so you can get out. I don't care if I get in trouble." The child's words were spoken with the solemnity of someone making a profound moral decision. And Amanda realized that Lily genuinely believed she was about to rescue someone who had been trapped and suffering. Amanda gently took Lily's hand and led her away from the closet door, explaining that they should wait for her parents to return before opening it. However, as they stood in the bedroom, Amanda thought she heard something that made her blood run cold. A faint sound that could have been crying or moaning, coming from the direction of the closet. The sound was so faint that Amanda couldn't be certain she had actually heard it. But the possibility that there might be something or someone in the closet filled her with dread. She began to wonder if Lily's claims about screaming might have some basis in reality, and if there might be something in the closet that her parents were hiding from her. Amanda decided that she needed to investigate the closet, both to reassure Lily and to ensure that there was no actual danger or distress occurring in the Blackwood home. She explained to Lily that she was going to open the closet door to show her that there was nothing inside that could hurt her or that needed help. When Amanda opened the closet door, she was initially relieved to see that it appeared to be a normal walk-in closet filled with Lily's clothes, shoes, and toys. However, as she looked more carefully, she noticed something that made her heart race. There was a small door at the back of the closet, partially hidden behind hanging clothes, and it appeared to be secured with a heavy lock. The presence of a locked door inside a child's closet was deeply disturbing and raised immediate questions about what might be behind it. Amanda realized that Lily's claims about screaming might not be the product of imagination or psychological disturbance, but might be her response to actual sounds coming from whatever was behind that locked door. As Amanda stood staring at the locked door, she heard the sound again. Faint but unmistakable crying or moaning coming from behind the door. The sound was human and filled with distress, and Amanda realized with horror that someone might actually be trapped behind that door, just as Lily had been claiming. Lily saw Amanda's expression and knew that she had finally found an adult who could hear what she had been experiencing. "You hear it too, don't you?" Lily whispered, her voice filled with relief and validation. "I told you someone was trapped in there. I told you they needed help." Amanda immediately called 911, explaining to the dispatcher that she was babysitting and had discovered what appeared to be someone trapped behind a locked door in the child's bedroom closet. The dispatcher took the call seriously and promised to send officers immediately, while also advising Amanda to get herself and the child out of the house until help arrived. As they waited for police to arrive, Amanda could hear the sounds from behind the locked door becoming more frequent and urgent, as if whoever was trapped had heard their voices and was trying to get their attention. The sounds were heartbreaking and filled with desperation. And Amanda realized that Lily had been listening to someone suffering for months while being told that her experiences weren't real. The police arrived within minutes, followed by paramedics and child protective services workers. Officers immediately secured the house and began investigating the locked door in Lily's closet. What they discovered behind that door would shock the entire community and reveal a family secret so dark that it challenged everyone's understanding of human nature and parental responsibility. Behind the locked door was a small, windowless room where Dr. Blackwood had been confining his elderly mother, who suffered from advanced dementia. Mrs. Blackwood Sr. had been locked in that tiny space for over a year, with minimal food, water, and sanitation, while her son told the community that she had been placed in a specialized care facility out of state. The elderly woman was found in a state of severe neglect and abuse, malnourished and traumatized by her prolonged confinement. Her cries for help had been what Lily had been hearing and reporting as screaming from her closet, and the child's desperate attempts to get adults to listen to her had been her efforts to save her grandmother's life. The investigation revealed that Dr. Blackwood had been systematically abusing his mother while using his psychiatric credentials to dismiss his daughter's reports of the abuse as childhood fantasies. He had been gaslighting his own child, convincing her that her perceptions weren't real while simultaneously using her bedroom closet to hide his horrific treatment of his mother. Dr. and Mrs. Blackwood were arrested and charged with elder abuse, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. The case received national attention due to the shocking nature of the crimes and the fact that a respected psychiatrist had been using his professional knowledge to cover up his abuse while psychologically tormenting his own daughter. Lily was placed in protective custody while the family situation was investigated and resolved. Child psychologists worked with her to help her understand that her perceptions had been accurate and that she had been a hero for trying to help her grandmother, even when no one would listen to her. The validation of her experiences was crucial for her psychological recovery and her ability to trust her own perceptions in the future. Amanda was deeply traumatized by her experience and the realization that she had been unknowingly placed in a situation involving serious abuse and neglect. She required extensive counseling to process the horror of what she had discovered and to cope with the knowledge that a child had been suffering psychological abuse while trying to save her grandmother's life. The case had profound implications for how professionals handled children's reports of unusual experiences and highlighted the importance of taking children's concerns seriously, even when they seem unlikely or impossible. Lily's months of being dismissed and disbelieved had compounded her trauma and had prolonged her grandmother's suffering. The screaming closet case experienced by Amanda Foster and Lily Blackwood represents one of the most horrific examples of how child abuse can be disguised as mental health treatment and how children's voices can be silenced by adults who use their authority to cover up their crimes. Dr. Blackwood's systematic abuse of both his mother and his daughter demonstrated the depths of human cruelty and the importance of believing children when they report experiences that adults find difficult to accept. Years later, Lily has recovered from her traumatic experience and has been placed with loving relatives who believe and support her. Her courage in continuing to report what she was experiencing, despite being repeatedly dismissed, ultimately saved her grandmother's life and exposed horrific abuse that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. Amanda has become an advocate for child protection and elder abuse prevention, using her experience to educate others about the importance of listening to children and investigating their concerns thoroughly, no matter how unlikely they might seem. The case serves as a powerful reminder that monsters don't always hide in closets. Sometimes they hide behind professional credentials and family respectability, using their positions of trust and authority to commit unspeakable crimes against the most vulnerable members of our society.